I think I should, yeah. Just double check. This is the same. Colleagues, can we start, please? Colleagues, we are about to start. Mamjab. Colleagues, can we get seated? Good morning, everyone, once again. My name is Mahlomola. I see on the program there is Ernest, so it's Mahlomola Ernest Daimane. I am from SANParks, South African National Parks. I will be facilitating the session today. It's supposed to be a very short day, but I think we are almost an hour behind schedule. But I promise that we'll finish on time. I think we had a lot of deliberations yesterday. For me, I think I had a lot of English in a week that I'm saturated. So today I think we're going to take it easy. There were a lot of discussions and I won't say arguments, but people were debating and, you know, I was just sitting there and excited in how people can just debate in English. And I was sitting to an old colleague of mine and he said to me, I won't mention name, he said to me, you know, if it was me and you, we'll be done, you know, before even an hour, because we agree with everything that is written here. But people were just playing with words. But I think at the end of the day, we managed to get what we wanted. For our program today, just few announcements from my side. That colleagues, we have stalls there. I still call them SMMEs, but I heard yesterday it's now called MSME. So I will get there. If I forget, please forgive me. So please let's just make time and visit them and see their products. I think they are selling good products. I've already bought few, so let's support them. And what will follow is I will call the DDG. I don't see her if she is ready for some reflections on our program yesterday. We saw during plenary that there were good feedback that we got from all the thematic teams. So there will be just a few reflections from DDG. Are you ready, DDG? Yes. Okay. I will also ask Predel to be ready with the to assist to assist with the reflection. Are you ready? Okay, she's good. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you and good morning, everyone. Is it a good morning? Okay. When I'm with my team, I normally say to them, if you are doing good, stand up. If you feel like you are doing good, you mind to stand up? Anyone? If you can stand up, just do a bit of an exercise. So if we feel like we are doing good, and then we go like this. And we go down again. And we go to the front. And we clap hands for ourselves. Thank you so much. So I'm sure that will also help us to stretch our brains, for today is the last day that we have been in conversations, and we hopefully are going to come out of today with something that we are all happy with. I have only one slide, and if it can be loaded. So this is just some of the key reflections that we had from yesterday. Firstly, that as stakeholders, we are embracing this whole concept of whole of society approach in the Nbsap review process. So everybody feels like, yes, I am part of this conversation that we are here for. Secondly, that some stakeholders, especially from local government, they felt left out as they are not included in the actions. We did agree on a process that we need to have a conversation through SALGA with local government, so that we can then ensure that the actions in relation to SALGA are fully indicated or outlined. Further, that in some instances, we're making reference to a 10% increase in XYZ without mentioning the baselines. So it's important that in those actions, or otherwise even in the indicators, that we reflect the baselines. So that is part of the work that we are going to do. For instance, there was a target indicator that relates to increase of the GDP contribution from the biodiversity economy by 10%. So we're going to reflect what is the current baseline in that particular indicator and others that may be there. Further, that we need to incorporate knowledge generation, citizen science, and traditional practices. And I see the stakeholders that will be very interested in that particular point are not yet in the room, but we do recognize that it's a point that they mentioned when we were having the discussions. Further, that there's a need to establish a biodiversity fund, and I think that particular issue might be amplified after the presentations we are going to get today, because today we are talking about how are we going to go about finding money to fund the Nbsap. Further, that we need to explore the feasibility of the Kali Fund under the CBD. So within the convention itself, there's a dedicated financial mechanism on access and benefit sharing, and we need to explore how at the country level we expand on the benefits of that particular fund. Further, that I think this one relates to the bullet number 2 on the left-hand side, to say that the biodiversity mandate is not prioritized in the local government because it is not effectively included in NEMA or any of the sectoral environmental management act. But as I indicated, that is a conversation that we are going to take forward with local government further. And then there was an issue around the need to compensate for compensation mechanism and also to capacitate provinces to respond to human-wildlife conflict within 24 hours. It's currently happening. However, there's a room for improvement in respect of how we handle human-wildlife conflict issues. And then further, that there's a need for the development of an implementation plan to effect the implementation of the Nbsap, and I think this is part of the outcome of what we are going to be discussing today, and also to agree on the process of how this Nbsap is then going to be implemented going further. And part of that will then be the establishment of this forum, which is called the Nbsap Forum. Maybe some of you already have a foot in the door in terms of being in that particular forum or otherwise, but that could be one of the institutional mechanisms that we then set for the implementation of the Nbsap itself. So that then concludes, unless otherwise there's one key message that we may have left out from yesterday. I don't know if there's anything from the floor. If there's any one key, is there any one big issue that we may have left out from the floor that we need to capture? Because here we're just reflecting on the big issues. Any taker? None? I give back to the program director, because he's still going to continue then with the reflections from yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, DDG. I think it's really important to get some reflection. Can I put some people on the spot here, just maybe? Do we have anyone from our traditional authority? Just for one reflection, please. And if we have anyone from our traditional health representative. Thank you. Yes. Traditional practice, correction, yes. we can take both, yeah. We can take, if there is traditional practice, it's also, you also welcome to make an input, and the traditional authority also. Just a reflection. Really appreciate it. Apologies for putting you on the spot.
Okay. Thank you, Program Director. My name is Umkhanyiseli Dudumayo from the Eastern Cape Province, representing the Institution of Traditional Leadership, the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa. We appreciate the fact that we are part of this consultative conference, which talks to the National Bio Strategies Action Plan, which started yesterday with us being part of the commissions. In reality, there are some areas where we feel that the community involvement is being part of this program, because in reality, the character of the department is national, with the satellite offices that are within the provinces where these activities are taking place, whether you speak of on the oceans, economy, or wetlands, all these activities that we were discussing on the biodiversity. In reality, if we are not working together, it would mean, because the department by its character is at national level, so these activities are taking place, and the human personnel for the department is not equal to the task. It needs the whole community process, the involvement of the leaders in various structures. So when we are working together, being part of the policy formulation, being part of the activities that will take place, it makes us to own up whether there is an illegal mining in our space to preserve these commodities that we have. It also talks to us because we're part of the government. So in reality, we are part, and then we'll just assist where it's possible, communicating with the department on behalf of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that reflection. In terms of traditional practices, do you want to make some input here, my brother? There's someone at the back?
The mic is not working. Okay. Yeah, if you want to close. Sanbonan, Molweni, Avshen. My name is Dr. SB. I am a traditional health practitioner. And I think maybe we need to correct something quickly. Shame the DDG erred in saying that we are not in the room. We are. We are just not wearing regalia. Phela yabona idlozi lisithole singamajida qana. And so we're quite comfortable now and then to take leave and go back to the flesh. So by the way, there are many organizations across the country which represents traditional healers. But I think as a matter of information, I must use this opportunity to inform people ukuthi the National Department of Health has got a division which is called African Traditional Medicine. This division is overarching all organizations representative of practitioners. I think it's very important for us to note that. I then happen to serve on that structure of the African Traditional Medicine. I am the Provincial Secretary General on that structure. I just thought that information should be out there for future references. My reflections. DFFE, we are very proud of you. We keep on telling you this. You are one department that truly listens to people. You might not be perfect. There are areas, you know, that need improvement. But in fairness, we must give praise to you and say, so far, we are happy with your inclusive strategy that you are applying. In as far as the discussions of yesterday are concerned, they were a bit robust. There is certain terminology that you use that is very uncomfortable, because I make reference to the fact that we always have, when it comes to traditional and indigenous knowledge systems, there is always this request of us having to comply. I think at some point we need to review our laws. And I think all of us in this room would agree that our laws are somewhat outdated. Even the terminology in our laws have got some element of colonialist sidelining and barring. And that can't be, because it means that we will be bouncing on one spot eternally. So I think our point of departure should then be, in as far as the existing laws are concerned, we need to review them, because technically they are not 100% recognizing of the current developments within our dispensation. So for me, that is one. And then perhaps the final one, there are other issues, I think at a provincial level, where we as practitioners would experience a lot of bottlenecking and a lot of gatekeeping, especially when some of your departments, especially the GDAT, where it would want permits for certain herbs that we use, as if we are not conscious of species, their existence, the entire biodiversity. We are actually, I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound funny. Traditional healers are the actual people that have 100% exposure and knowledge of biodiversity in its entirety. And when I say us, it is inclusive of traditional leaders as well. So I'm trying to say, let's move away from the stakeholder term and let's draft towards a partnership term. That's important, because the way that I am described or categorized is going to influence my thinking, it's going to influence my enthusiasm and my willingness to want to do things. And to us, biodiversity is extremely important, because you can't be a traditional healer and not have knowledge of nature and not have respect for nature. It's impractical. Then you're in the wrong place. With those few words, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those reflections. I was actually very intentional about traditional leadership and traditional practices because I am from a homeland in Kwakwa, and that's my root, that's where I come from. And more often we forget about our roots. And when we get into this science, I've studied science, but I know that indigenous knowledge is part of me. And I cannot forget where I come from. I actually bought Impepo yesterday because I was saying, I think my ancestors are forgetting about me. Maybe they are looking for me and they can't find me. So let me see if they will locate me. And I think I really feel better this morning. So I think it's still working. So I was very intentional. Thank you for those reflections. And we still want to get more reflection, and there is a small exercise that we wanted to do for those who cannot really take the mic and comment. And Predil will just quickly explain that to the delegates.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Predil Majid. I'm from Sanby, in support of DFFE running the program. You'll see on the screen what we like to use Mentimeter, especially to capture the voices of those who don't always feel comfortable speaking up in a room full of people. So I would like you to please take your phone, open the camera, and aim it at the QR code. I see there's 37 people that are, with the technology, so they don't need the little tutorial now, but yeah, if you aim your camera at the QR code, there'll be a little yellow box that comes up at the bottom that says Menti, and you click on there and it's going to take you to the responder page where you can then put in, whatever you want to say. It's an open-ended question. You can put as many responses as you want to, as long as the screen is still up. And I think it doesn't really limit the characters, so you can write quite a long message. If it's too long, then please send us another one. We'll have a second question after the reflections, where we would like you to give us some advice or ideas on what can be improved. It can be about the program, it can be about the process to get to this point around the Nbsap, and it can even be comments on the Nbsap itself. So please, I see my little tutorial is working. Double the number of people on there. And you'll see there it says 27 of 81, 83 have responded. So now I know that even though you're there, you haven't said anything yet. So thank you very much, Ernest. I think it's working now. Thanks, everyone. I hope to get all of your responses.
Are we still managing the technology? There are 4. Okay. Do we still have some reflections on the floor? We can take 2 more. I think there was some reflection in the front seat. Is it withdrawn? You good? Okay.
Dumelang bagaetsho. Morning, I am Prince Tumeleng Shole of Batlung Bahashole, the National Secretary of Contralesa Youth. I think my reflection stems from the work that has been put in by all of us for the past couple of years. I'd like to really commend the department for creating a platform where we are able to really challenge how we think or how we view things, how we understand ourselves. From our side as traditional leaders, we're able to participate even in the biodiversity management plans and really give our perspective of what we think of the fauna and flora of the country, of our region, shape the understanding around them, integrate and engage with traditional leaders whom they themselves fall under our custodianship, to be direct, because they are working libraries of where we come from. We are the custodians of culture, heritage, and tradition. And what the platform that the department has been able to create beyond biodiversity is having people talk to each other. People talk to each other about things that matter to them, and what matters to us is the world or the earth that we walk on, that we live in, that we consume things from. So I'm coming from that perspective, not just about yesterday, but what has happened over the past couple of years, going to the Indabas, and even leading up to here. If one was to reflect, DDG, you would remember the never-ending Zoom meetings. Never-ending Zoom meetings when we were all trying to craft something would really be proud to say we have a piece of ownership, or we contributed in what would shape the South Africa we really want to live in. Define conservation, define biodiversity in our own terms, aligning it with international practices, of course, especially us as rural people, who really constitute the bulk of this country, because even if you are from the cities, you originate from rural areas. So it's really a wonderful platform, and I'm really grateful that we all were able to participate from different sectors. And I'm grateful that we have such progressive leadership in a state institution such as this department. Ke a leboga.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other hands. Oh, there is a mic at the back.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you, Program Director. Ngikhuleke kumakhosi akhona phakathi kwethu nendlu yobuholi bendabuko. Ngibingelele bonke abantu abakhona. Igama nguSibonile wakwaMabuntana. Kusuka KZN. I'm a member of Peoples and Parks Executive National. What we commend is this gathering whereby we manage to interact together. We manage to echo as to what we usually observe in various programs that are taking place in various provinces. As a structure, or as Peoples and Parks, as we represent the land owners, we would like to emphasize the issue of saying having a land does not define us outside of the traditional leadership in our areas. So there can be certain time where you find out we are taken as if those who own land, they don't recognize traditional leadership and stuff. We know that in our areas there are traditional leaders, and we know we belong in certain traditional leaders, as enshrined in chapter 12 of the Constitution. Also, again, as we understand the land tenure issue, we do have people who own land with their title deeds, but that does not define us outside. So we are very grateful to be in the same room so that everything can be outlined clearly. And when you check, we share the same sentiments in terms of how we want the Nbsap to be applied and how we want to input on it so that it works for us. Just because by the time we are scrambling around each other, we will not reap the fruits. But this conference, indeed, it's a significant step that shows that we need a collaborative effort going forward. The visibility of these structures in the programs that are planned by the FFE will continue to give a clear indication as to, yes, indeed, we are going there to a promised land. Where there are challenges, let's come together, let's consult each other so that we get to understand each other. But knowingly that each and every one of us has an area of operation, have an ideology, which we sit down and share it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How are we doing with the Mentimeter? I think the second question seems to be a bit difficult. I see slow responses there, so I'm not sure if everyone has registered for that one. So if we can quickly go through that one so we can move on with our program. I think those are really great reflections. And I think I also applaud the department in terms of, inclusivity and making sure that people really participate in these processes. Issues around land ownership, land tenure, these are really sensitive issues considering where we're coming from. But I think there is a lot of progress in terms of how we're doing conservation and biodiversity. And I've seen great changes in terms of, moving away from our traditional way of conservation where it used to be really preservation where people were excluded. And now, it's really amazing to see even our traditional healers being part of this and making sure that they have their contribution in the development of Nbsap, because these are the resources that they use. And I think they even understand it more than we do, and they have been conserving these resources for a long time. So I think these are really positive sentiments and reflection that are coming from the floor, and I think we're doing really well in terms of making sure that there is improvement in terms of our planning and implementation. So Predil, I'm not sure how well we are doing. You'll give me an indication, but we need to move, colleagues, with our program. I'll suggest that we give it like 5 more minutes and then we can move to the next agenda, but there is someone on the floor. You can.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. My key reflection for yesterday, Chair, is I was overjoyed hearing DDG mentioning the Nbsap forum. I think that's a great way of moving ahead with things more pragmatically. I also want to express my happiness with the way the meetings were conducted yesterday. I think it was a great demonstration of whole of society. But I wanted to say that with regards to the target, I think we still have a lot of considerations to make. I think it's important to highlight that a lower target is not only disadvantaging implementation, but it can delay the aspirations of the very communities that we want to support. it also impacts the real economy, not just biodiversity. So I call upon the meeting to consider a very robust target after all the deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. One last take from the floor.
Thank you, Program Director, and greetings to all. Program Director, I just want to remind, actually, on the, because currently there's an issue regarding the adjacent livestock and crop farmers, whereby in certain province or areas, you find that the DCA are causing damages to the crops, and also the DCA sometimes kill or attack and kill the livestock. So it becomes an issue now to say whom is actually taking the accountability on that. And you find that the very same people that we know where the DCA escaped from, they are nowhere to be found when we have to sit in a round table and discuss the issue. So that is another problem, because we were told that there's a compensation on the livestock only. Compensation, which is called a protocol compensation, which is not actually a police. So I just want to check as well, when are they finalizing the crop and livestock compensation policy? Because we are sitting in problems as community leaders now. We are expected to respond, because the managing authorities, all of them are saying they don't have a compensation policy on crops, while the damages is beyond $1 million as we speak now. And the damage is still continuing. So I think it's very important that the leaders at the provincial level look at this before it, because this is a national issue. It's not affecting one province. We all know that this matter is actually taking place everywhere in the country. So I think that is very important that the leaders of the province or the government be clear on that where are the farmers supposed to claim or report the damages. Because now they are confused where to go. But damage is still continuing. So we want to be clear on that how will this issue be resolved? Because we are talking now and then, but no implementation. And still we are not so clear when are they going to actually finalize the issue of the policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if we want to open a dialogue on that one. I know it's a serious issue. There is a burning question, inputs from the floor.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Let me start by saying all protocols are observed. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Princess Lorraine Moko, and I am the national organizer of Contralesa Women's Wing. I want to contribute specifically on what was presented yesterday. You know, the world and everything in it belongs to God. We need to understand that. As we sit here, we are God's creation. He has entrusted each and every one of us to look after the environment. Now, thinking about yesterday and the presentations, it made me wonder, today when we look at what our children are watching and what we are watching, we had before the tale of dinosaurs, for instance, that they used to be dinosaurs here on earth. We are heading there, we, this generation, this nation. When they were presenting about species that becomes extinct, it made me wonder that with the amount of poaching, the amount of over-harvesting, the way we are driving pollution, that this is where we are heading, to the telltale of they used to be dinosaurs. Our children, we need to think of it, that biodiversity and conservation is about preserving today for tomorrow and for generations to come. And from a traditional leader's point of view, and as custodians of land all over this country, the first thing we need to realize is that the people that which live with us, we are responsible to make sure that where they are immediate surrounds. If a person sees a paper on the floor, are they able to pick it up? Are they able to think that where I am, there might be an animal that's going to pick up the plastic that I'm throwing? Looking at our communities where we come from, if you want to see filth, come to our communities, right? It makes you also wonder, if I don't care to pick up paper and throw in a bin, conservation starts there. That my immediate environment, am I able to care for it? Am I able to look after it? I live in the beautiful Western Cape, the high blue flag beach areas with majestic mountains. But let me tell you, if I go to the beach and when I eat my beautiful Kentucky and throw away there, a species is going to be affected. Where I have thrown is going to be dirty. Somebody that comes to that place where I was supposed to leave it the way I found it, clean, beautiful, it's not going to work. That is why it's very much important that this conference becomes a good reflection for ourselves, not only because of we want government to change something. Government is us. We are government. We need to be able to govern ourselves. The ideal situation is for us to wake up in the morning and say, today, what am I going to do that is going to conserve the environment for my children, for my great-grandchildren, and generations to come? Because this world, I want to see it 1,000 years from now, looking better than the way it was today as I stand. And for me, that is my take, that we need to understand that we were placed here on earth to look after the earth, so that we don't get surprised with what is happening with the environmental changes, with global warming and so on, and not to become denialists of what is happening. When we are told that the environment is changing, it is changing. Today, you might have been living in a mud house. I personally lived in a mud house before. But today, I live in a place where it's made out of brick. Where did they get that? It was dug somewhere. Did they fill those holes where they dug? And so on. We are wearing beautiful jewelries. Where did they take it from? Somebody dug a mine somewhere. And so on. The examples are endless. But what I would like to say in a nutshell, we need to look after the environment for ourselves and for generations to come. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very nice wrap up for this session on reflections. I think it comes with wisdom. So it is really important sometimes that we just come and listen, you know, and I'm glad that this session was not dominated by government or scientists or, you know, conservation entities. So I think it's really good reflections, and I would really love to see how all the reflections and the inputs are integrated in this plan. So I would like us to move with our program now, colleagues. It's just after 10. And
Sorry, Program Director.
Is there?
Yes. Thank you so very much. Greetings to Program Director, umuntu akhuleke emakhosini. Bese sibingelela wonke umuntu okhona la endlini. Igama lami, I'm Duduzi Mfeka from People's Zone Park, coming from Ismangaliso. I just want to do a quick few reflections here, Chairperson. Firstly, we would like to actually thank the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs for actually conducting such a, which I can say it's a very brilliant consultative conference. However, from the community point of view, sometimes we feel like observers. Why am I saying this? It's because in some cases, for one to be able to tap into biodiversity economy, you ought to have a document that speaks to land ownership, particularly communities that are from those that are owning lands from those protected areas. Most of them do not have title deed. I don't know if there's anything the FFE can do to work together with the Department of Land Reform to quickly process this issue of title deed so that those communities who do not have the ownership of the land will actually get their title deed and be able to tap into those biodiversity economy. Also, I'm the chairperson of the youth in Smangaliso. I would like to actually also extend our gratitude that the youth are also part of this consultative conference. However, I always have a view that if you are going to neglect young people, you are running a risk of neglecting the future. So we call upon DFFE that in your structures, make sure that you have a structure that solely represents young people. We also want to see young people being program directors in such events so that we can also, you know, have a motivation that we can actually benefit from one of these things. And also, we are talking about biodiversity economy. Surely you would be working with your stakeholders such as the managing authorities. We're also calling upon the DFFE to actually, I don't know what I can say, to speak to those managing authorities to ring-fence opportunities solely for young people. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, people in parks. Apologies. Diniko was complaining about the lights yesterday, so I'm struggling to see at the back if there is still someone on the floor. Don't see anyone, so can we proceed now? Thank you very much. Today we're really focusing on financial sustainability, and there will be few presentations on the floor. I'm not really going to get into that because I take it that we have all gone through the Nbsap document and we understand where we're trying to get into. I think my lessons was after COVID, especially with the parastatals and other, you know, conservation entities and authorities. It was really a difficult one to recover after COVID, and, you know, relying only on government subsidies has become a challenge. And we are now aware that we have to come with different means of making sure that whatever business we are doing in biodiversity and conservation is sustainable. So today we'll learn more about, different models and approach in terms of how we can make this business sustainable. So I just want to check if in our program the speakers are ready. Next we have Ms. Samukeliswe Shozi to present to us on the findings of the biodiversity expenditure review and how does government spend on biodiversity. Please let's give a round of applause and welcome her on the stage. Can we load the presentation? Did you share your?
Can you please project the presentation on the screen as well? Okay, while they project the presentations, I will proceed. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Samkelisiwe Shozi from UNDP. I'd like to acknowledge the DDG and the leadership of the DFFE, the leadership of SANBI, Amakhosi and Kidumedisa Makhoshi who are here amongst us, the traditional leadership, people and parks, our NGOs, any academic institutions, research institutions, and all other colleagues from the various organizations, from the public sector, community leadership, and just the broader stakeholders amongst us. I hope I have not left anyone out. So today's presentations, it's still not flighting. I've been also listening to the conversations and reflections from DDG this morning and the program director. And just as a precursor to the presentation, I wanted to point out the importance of ensuring that all our targets, the indicators and the variables that we are crafting or refining rather in the Nbsap are actually financeable, they're investable, they're bankable, and it's something that can be projected as an investment-ready product, able to attract various sources of capital. So, in my opinion, I would rather have a document that's 70% perfect, but then that's going to attract the various sources of capital, especially from the private sector. So, and whatever we are designing today in this room, because we are all, we've taken a whole of government approach, whatever we are designing and crafting as a product for the country should actually be linked to feasible finance instruments. So you'll understand why I've started as a precursor to my presentation. And I'm emphasizing it's important that we craft the documents and probably not even lambast one single role player or one single department and hold them accountable for the reasons why there is a biodiversity finance gap, whereas the document is owned by all of us as the various stakeholders. Okay, so let me then proceed. So today I'm focusing on the expenditure report, or what we call the biodiversity expenditure report. And then the acronym commonly used is the BER. So it's basically just outlining the spending patterns that South Africa has spent. So the expenditures of the country as a whole on biodiversity. So whether it's conservation management across the NGOs, in the public sector and in the private sector. So the BR, or the Biodiversity Expenditure Report, is actually a step in the BioFin methodology. So in order for us to close this biodiversity finance gap, we need to determine how much we are spending. So once we know how much we are spending, then we'll be able to determine the financial needs of the country, across the country, and also then determine what further investments they need to be inculcated and then a plan for in future. So in this step, the BR is one tool. And I just want to emphasize that later on in the program, you'll see that my colleague Eva is actually going to now dive deeper into the steps of the methodology. So I've extracted the expenditure reports, and I'll take everybody through that. So this is just outlining what the BR is and how we've managed to source the data. So we went across both public sector and the private sector, and then to determine and try to track down all these various expenditures. And then they are obviously attached to the activities. That's why I have emphasizing that whatever we're designing, the indicators, the variables, they need to be linked to a particular financing mechanism so that the document becomes live and it's not just sitting as a policy or a strategy, but that we can be able to attract the capital stack that's required. So again, what is the scope of the BR, or the Biodiversity Expenditure Review or Report? So the scope covers the historical expenditure for South Africa stemming from 2016 to 2024, 2025. Remember, we are looking at a 10-year trend in order for us then to design the next Nbsap, which will cover the next 10 years. So it's important, although it is in the past, it's historical expenditure, but it's a very good propeller and indicator of, like, to try and signify then how much does South Africa need as a country going forward. So those are all the institutions. So we've tried to encompass as much and tag it down to the different NGOs, research institutions. I know there's business in the room, but I didn't hear from the participation if we've got academic institutions such as UCT and UJ. It would be great if they are also in the room. So the BR is as comprehensive as possible, and it has not left out any of the role players, because obviously biodiversity is so complex. That's why I also keep saying we can't pin down and lambast just DFFE and SANBI where there are shortfalls or structural challenges, because South Africa in itself is also a unique country. We are affected by geopolitical tensions, we are affected by climate and global change, we are affected by the global economic crisis, we've got low GDP growth, we've got macroeconomic challenges and fiscal constraints. So those also affect the expenditure and the budget available in the country. So it's actually impossible to try and pin that responsibility and that weight only on a single department. So they are trying to do as much as they can with the maximum, the minimum, or the limited resources, and operate in a very complex biodiversity finance landscape. These are the definitions. They're not maybe important. It's just to classify that we've got capital expenditure. So capital expenditure is more long-term in nature. It's all maybe acquiring land. I know one of the speakers right now was talking about land degradation. So when you acquire land, those will be classified as capital expenditure. And then operating expenditure is more short-term in nature, and it's the operating cost maybe in a protected area. So we've tried to really dig down and cover both CapEx and OpEx, or capital and operational expenditure. So the data is sourced from there, and these slides will also be shared. Could I also just indicate how much time that I have, so I'm not running over? So this is one of the most important graphs. So what are the findings and what have we observed over the period? So in South Africa, so this is obviously applicable to South Africa, we've got sort of a convergence where we see what we call nominal growth over the period. So we spent about 15.2 billion in 2016, and you can see that has increased to about 20.1 billion. But that's just a nominal increase. But when we extract or take away inflation, so inflation is actually brutal because it's eroding the purchasing power. So if Jeff funds us maybe 20 billion today versus 20 billion 5 years ago has been eroded because of the inflation. So although nominally we see the increase from 15 billion to 20 billion, in real terms, after we consider inflation, you can see that it's actually 14 billion and 12 billion respectively over the years. So that's just the graph showing both of the two, and the difference between nominal and real expenditure and why. And you'll also see that in the program director just spoke about COVID. So that had a significant damp in the graph. You see the decline in expenditure. South Africa was experiencing a lot of fiscal constraints in that time, not just South Africa, but it happened globally. And then again, and then in 2018 where there was a global financial crisis. But then after that, we're managing to recover, and you see that our expenditure is actually increasing over the years. So these figures, just indicating that there was a thematic area yesterday on biodiversity mainstreaming. Although we are in the room, we are the professionals in biodiversity, there's still just that lack of awareness that we need to create, because they're still seeing biodiversity as a low fiscal priority and not an investable asset class. So this is indicating that we need to be more vigorous and intentional when we go out and create and emphasize that biodiversity actually underpins the economy. There's tourism, agriculture. I know there's somebody from the ARC, the Research Council. There's mining, there's the extractive industries, and even we ourselves, we're extracting the jewelry, the clothing from nature, and that's actually biodiversity, but yet it's still remaining as a low fiscal priority. This is also, I'm going to spend a bit of time on the next two slides. So the graph is depicting now the expenditure per department and per entity, both nationally and from a provincial and a local level, so even drilling down to municipalities. So it's heavily dominated by the department, rightfully, because that reflects they are the conservation and management authority in South Africa. So they spent about 61% over the period on biodiversity. Private sector, there's still limited participation, which is why in the beginning I said it's important for us to refine our activities so that we attract different innovative financing mechanisms, even if it means they're bypassing the traditional financing intermediaries. So there's like elephant insurance, for example. The DDG has spoken about the human-wildlife conflict. So we could have elephant insurance, maybe a rhino fund, ocean financing. Molele also spoke about the rising sea temperatures. So we've got South Africa has a lot of room to play and design and also action and attract different innovative financing instruments, so we can look beyond what has been traditionally done in the past. For example, the recent launch of the water bond. So DFF is spending the most as the conservation authority of the country, followed by the provincial government entities, and then other national departments are spending at about 7%. Research organizations as well, that because they've got that advocacy role together with the NGOs, and then also at a municipal level. Then the other finding is that there's 52 billion that's been spent on protected areas and other conservation measures. So that's also the largest share of expenditure. It's 52 billion, or in percentage terms, it's 34%. And then there's the biodiversity planning, also accounting for a significant portion at about 24%, and the green economy representing 19% of the total. And then those are just all the other categories that I won't mention. Biosafety is at 0%. Biodiversity, knowledge and awareness, you can see it's very low, it's still at 4%. So we've got a task collectively as stakeholders or role players in biodiversity to constantly create that awareness and urgency and importance of biodiversity for South Africa. Then we'll drill down again back to DFFE's program-led expenditure trends. Like I said, they are spending 61% overall, as it should be. But obviously it doesn't mean that we need to rely solely on DFFE. We need to attract different sources and financing mechanisms so that we can close that biodiversity finance gap. So there's fisheries management, chemicals and waste, environmental programs, climate change, air quality, and other administration programs. And then we see also Sanbi and Isimangaluso's finance patterns. This speaks to the metropolitan municipalities or the metros in the country. So they have a cumulative expenditure at 1.5 billion over the years. Municipalities, like the other provincial and national entities, were affected by COVID. So the graphs are, what can I say, peaking at different stages and then they drop again. But now that momentum has been gained again and South Africa is on a recovery trajectory. This slides emphasizes the point again, GEF, or the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund have actually been crucial in supporting South Africa in terms of funding, because we can't spend without the funding. So the funding is very critical. If there's no money to spend, all our documents and our Nbsap will just be documents that are gathering dust. We do need the funding, and that's going to propel the expenditure in the country. So that's so the partners that we have and the finance that we attract is very crucial. So over the past decades, we see that GEF has provided more than 26 billion USD and through grants and mobilizing different sources of projects. Although we're seeing this, we also still need to focus on tracking the expenditure. So that's what we call tagging, it's just tracking where the expenditure is going in the country. That's been a constraint because I'm sure the figures are guesstimates. So if we could actually track down each and every single activity, which might be impossible, but we need to try and work on some policy work and see how South Africa can actually accurately as best as possible actually track the expenditure across the departments, across NGOs and the whole of society. I have 30 seconds, so I'm actually right on time. But it's just for the slide to say we'll have reflections later, I'm sure. But that's just the picture of what South Africa is spending and also highlighting the significant work that has been played by DFFE and the other role players. I'm not underplaying their importance as well in this biodiversity value chain. I have 5 seconds and I'm right on time. My presentation ends here. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Ms. Shozi. Colleagues, because of time, I would like to move to the next presenter. We'll have a discussion at the end of this session. If you have a question or an input, I think we can just note it down and then we'll get to it later. I would like to call Mr. Sydney Nkosi. His presentation will reflect on the case studies for some of our selected protected areas. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Let me pass my greetings to the House of Traditional Leaders who are here, our political principals if they are here, locally, provincially, nationally, but also recognize the presence of our traditional healers that are here, Tozan Bokoko Nomkulu. Bese sibulisa zonke ihlwele ikhona nemphakathi khona. Yeah. My duty then, Chair, maybe before I start, there is a word in the corridors, Chair. There's a big question that says, why my beard doesn't match my hair color? I really don't have an answer. And I am warning you, colleagues. Ngiyacabanga ugogo nomkhulu bazongifakazela. Ngizobona lokho ekwabona uSawule eDamaseko. Ufuna uqhubeka nalo mbuzo. If you continue with this question, you are very warned. With that being said, I think it's quite important that the presentation that just was presented sets a good scene in terms of how then the whole biodiversity expenditure trends and patterns takes shape, with the allocation totally at about averaging 0.1 allocation. The biggest question then one asks, what then happens at the ground? You know, what we then did was looking at 5 provinces in the country. I won't mention the provinces, you know, to say in this allocation, in this expenditure trends and patterns, what then happens in the absence of money. And that's the picture that I'm going to paint, so that the colleagues that will be presenting post this presentation will give us ideas in terms of what we need to do to intervene. This particular presentation happens within the broad context. I'm sure you have heard enough now and knowledgeable about the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that looks at the agency. We need to act as a globe. Globally, we need to act at a regional level, we need to act as national, and we need to act at provincial as well as local, including traditional areas. So it's a collective action that they are calling for from a policy action point of view, but also you know, we need to transform the economy so that it works for people. It won't make any sense for us to conserve and protect, but the people are not in as part of the picture. So we need to take that cognizance that, especially in the country, there's a huge unemployment rate. I think the youth voice did indicate to that. There's challenges about inequality. There's challenges also about, you know, access to resources, and I won't go into the details in terms of that. So the people really takes the center stage. Hence, the issues about living in harmony with nature. So the living part is the people that are central to nature. And I think it also happens within the background of the 30 by 30 target 3 that says 30% of terrestrial and marine by 2030. And I think yesterday we had good conversations with our colleagues, and I just need to warn them as well that I might reconsider my concessions, you know, that I've made yesterday. So if we are to increase the portfolio by 30%, but we're not matching that increase of the portfolio with matching resources, so it creates a difficult position in terms of how do we then proceed. But we need to take those issues into cognizance. And we keep a register as national in terms of the size that we have, the hectareage, at what % we're sitting at, and what is our current projections. But I think the discussions that we had yesterday will also assist to boost our ambition in some areas of the program. Then what is the problem? Obviously, is the absence of adequate funding that we normally talked about, but also the current funding model. We can't be permanently umbilically connected to National Treasury for allocations of funds. That is not sustainable, given that within the context of South Africa, there's too many competing priorities that needs to be taken into cognizance. And I think that is quite important we do. I've mentioned the mismatch between the increase in land under conservation vis-a-vis the resources that are available. So we need to, that is a problematic situation we find ourselves. And this affects what we call management effectiveness, ecotourism support, infrastructure development that supports ecotourism, potential revenue generation. If you don't have facilities, the roads are not good, you're not positioned to generate any revenue. Investment opportunities, who want to put their money where there's no return on investment. So it really affects, and how then you form your partnerships if you are not in a good state. But also the issues of, the critical skills that you require to manage. So all that constitute what we call a problem. And also the issues around, varying institutional arrangements and governance. You find that certain provincial departments have got entities, and certain provincial departments, conservation is embedded in the department. So it creates that varying elements in terms of so that what we've formed or constitute what we call the problem. Then we started going into the belly of the beast and see what is in the belly of the beast when we talk about financial challenges within provincial management authorities. As you will see that when we punch the numbers, budget allocation vis-a-vis expenditure, sometimes we dream in government to say there is this, I call it a high ambition budget that I will normally set, but to get an official allocation that Treasury confirms. If you subtract your allocation from your desired budget, then you've got what we call a financing gap, a gap that is created. And that has been carried over years, and therefore it creates that huge gap. And what we've actually noticed then, I think the colleague previous presentation did allude to this matter, that annual increase in overall allocation, it sits around 2.7% vis-a-vis average annual inflation of 5.13%. So in essence, you've got a decrease of 5% in terms of your allocation. In government, if you spend less on the year during that financial year, you get lesser in the next year. So that really affects you. And in that allocation, especially that graph that indicated from the provincial's point of view, there's about 13% allocation. We looked at that 13%, where does it go? We found that, or observed that between 60 to 90% of that goes to what we called a compensation of employees. So it pays the salaries. But if we're to operate at a provincial level efficiently, you need to have your OPEX, your CAPEX for new infrastructure, you need to have your repairs and maintenance budget, and then your compensation of employees. But the biggest chunk of that budget goes to pay for salaries. Then you are left with less for your OPEX budget to deal with the other issues, but your CAPEX and repairs and maintenance. Hence, we have seen a decline in terms of the state of protected areas within that space. Then we looked at revenue generation and enhancements initiatives that happens in the space. Some sell game, they charge gate fees, conservation fees. Some that are still got running facilities, they operate that or either concession that. So there is some level of revenue generation initiatives happening, but is that reserve fully leveraging on its potential to actually generate more revenue so that they can sustain themselves, cut the umbilical cord, they can stand alone moving to the future. So that area needs to be really enhanced so that these facilities generate the revenue. And the truth I think we need to live with is that not all public goods or public goods that are held in public trust are going to make them money. You know, sorry to speak on your behalf, Sun Parks, because it's also an entity. It's one entity that is fairly doing well because of the established brand. You know, they've got lots of concessioned activities. And you find that their revenue sits around, you'll correct me in your presentation, sits around a good figure, let me say a good figure, vis-a-vis what we allocate them as government. So in that space, they are able, amongst the 20 parks, national parks that they have, to subsidize other parks. But the picture at the provincial level is not indicating the same. It's not giving you the same because there's quite constraints in terms of resources. And therefore, that space needs to be looked at properly. Either you break even, but generate some revenue so that it gets invested back to the facility itself. Then we go to the, operational challenges. I guess those are well known in terms of, what risk do they pose. Over and above the financial challenges, you have to deal with invasive plants, illegal grazing. A colleague of mine also told me, don't forget to mention illegal mining that is happening in these spaces. Because when, from the look of things, it's seen as spaces that are not used, and therefore you've got these uninvited activities happening there. Illegal harvesting of resources, poaching, illegal access, and. So over and above your money issues, you've got your operational challenges that you need to face. And you can only address those challenges if you've got boots on the ground, you've got the required personnel, but also the resources. We then move to look what is contained in the belly of the beast in terms of capacity and capability. Because at certain areas you need specific skills. In some instances you find the ranger operating overnight accommodation, hospitality industry. So they do both. You can't have that situation because it's not going to translate in a better revenue generation. But we also looked at the workforce, at what percentage, vacancy rate percentage they are sitting at, and it's very alarming. You could see from that percentage that has been indicated. We looked at the state of tourism support infrastructure because we're saying that for you to be in a better position to generate revenue, you need to have good roads, signage, the trails must be working, the accommodation must be world-class, all those tourism facilities. Because once a tourist talks bad about your facility, you lose that tourist forever. So you don't leverage on the word of mouth to do that. In terms of management effectiveness, I won't go deep, because if you don't have boots on the ground, you don't have the required skills and capability and capacity to do it, you are not in a better position to effectively manage the space. Hence, the scoring gets lesser when you are being assessed. Then on the last two thematic areas, we looked at that governance institutional arrangement in terms of how you are designed structurally, but also your governance systems that are in place from a capability and capacity point of view. If I can drop a billion rand to a provincial management authority, will they be able, my apologies, I left it behind. Will they be able to spend that money, properly and deliver on what they plan to deliver? So that capability aspect is quite critical, because if I am a ranger, I can't deal with procurement services. I'm a butterfly specialist, but I'm required to also, do terms of reference, go to the SEM, through the SEM processes, and deal. So you need specific skills for specific functions. So from an institutional point of view, you need to be set up so that you can respond to that particular need. And lastly, the issues around effective co-management agreements. If you can't make money, you can't fulfill your obligations in terms of the co-management agreements that we've had with communities that have ceded their land for conservation purposes, and therefore there's no beneficiation that is seen in that aspect. So that situation has to change, because now communities are also demanding that those beneficiations should be visible and should not only be in paper. And lastly, we just made certain observations that we appreciate that there is historical, current, and potential, if we don't do anything, future challenges on these particular spaces. But also we're seeing that that clearing financial gap is continuing to grow, and we need responsive governance and institutional arrangements, that there's agency for action on various levels. Public goods held in public trust, what is their true value? You know, an American comes to South Africa, buys a can of Coke. My favorite is Coke Zero, spend 10 rands. They've brought their dollars. Are we charging the true value of conservation? They come here, spend time in facilities that are 5-star, eat good food, the service, and charge them the same money that probably a South African will spend. Is it true value for conservation? Because these assets are for South Africans, and whoever wants to enjoy them must pay the true value and cost of conservation. So it's something that we need to look at, and just we need a new financing plumbing or architecture, and colleagues will give us some indications that, and we need to be deliberate in our efforts and dedicated investment in these public assets, but also being considerate of the competing needs, national circumstances, and priorities as well. And I see, for me, it fits nicely in that concept of sustainable use. I thank you. Chair, my last reflections, I hope colleagues stop that questions of why my beard doesn't match my hair color.
Another round of applause for Mr. Sidney. It's really a great review in terms of biodiversity expenditure, zooming down to protected areas. Even though the case study one started as a threat, so Mr. Nkosi always, make sure that he threatens us so that we don't ask questions, but there is still time for discussion, so we'll still go there. I think next is sandparks. My colleagues, Dr. Govenda is here, just to reflect on sandparks sustainable model. A round of applause for Dr. Govenda. You need some moral support?
Fantastic. So, really good to be here. Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome to you all, and greetings to the traditional leadership in the room, the healers, the political leadership, the department heads, friends, and partners. It's so good to be here, so good to sort of lead you through what we're doing as sandparks in terms of financial sustainability. It's kind of strange that as conservationists we're having so much of discussions these days around how we finance it, but it's become such an important topic. And I thank the speakers before me, because I think they led us very nicely into the current situation. So they gave us a little bit of into the belly of the beast, said Mr. Nkosi. So I think that's where we are. We understand the challenge ahead, and we now need to think about what are possible options. I think Mr. Nkosi spoke about that. Sandparks is doing well, but I think we also are very sort of, we acknowledge the fact that we've got to do more. We've got to do more collectively. We've got to do more as an organization. And so we've been thinking a little bit about what do we invest in? How do we sort of make sure that we're thinking about the next 20 years and expanding our protected areas and making sure conservation is more accessible? So if you think about sand parks, in lots of ways we're asset rich, right? So we got hectares. We got 4 million hectares of land. We've got 70%, it looks good from a revenue perspective, about 70% is self-funded through tourism, to our tourism plant. So it seems like we've got commercial resilience. We get about 6 million visitors a year visiting our parks across the network, the 20 national parks that were mentioned. But when we start to sort of look at this asset richness, it needs to be contrasted against this cash poverty, or the cash poor reality. And so essentially what it means is that when you go drill down into national parks, only 4 of our national parks are generating a surplus. And so those surplus actually then has to get deployed back into managing conservation in the other parks. So being so heavily reliant on 4 parks puts a lot of pressure on the estate. So we've got to be thinking about how do we bring the other parks also on board to stop being reliant on those four national parks that are making a profit or generating surplus. The other big thing is that 90% of our assets are non-liquid assets, so they're not easy to exchange them for cash. And we have about 10 billion rand of maintenance infrastructure backlog. And I think that this is the reality that's faced by a lot of our provincial entities as well. Infrastructure is old, it's aging, we're keeping it going, but there isn't enough finance to redeploy into that infrastructure. More especially, we're seeing the impacts of flood, and we're seeing the impacts of climate change, and needing to repair that infrastructure. We know insurances don't cover the full amount, so we need to go back to our balance sheet and draw on it to try to sort of do some of those infrastructure repairs, climate resilience adaptations, etc. So what's really happening is that there's a widening funding gap. So essentially, in real terms, government allocations are growing below inflation. And for a good cause. We understand South Africa is a developing country. There's a lot that government needs to fund. And so if conservation can find other means to fund it, then that would be good, because then it would relieve the fiscus to do other good developmental things that are needed. So in terms of our government infrastructure grants, we can see that they're not really keeping up with inflation. We can also see that this has resulted in a lot of infrastructure backlog. And a park like Kruger, it's got thousands of kilometers of roads, and we've seen in the last flood is that when those roads get damaged, when bridges collapse, it takes a lot of that funding to actually get them up and running. So that's where we are. So where are we now? So I think this is where, the heat is on, because it's not just managing our protected areas and just keeping those 20 going and keeping all the provincial entities going, parks. We actually need to start to think about an inclusive conservation model, or we are thinking about. You look at our white paper, our policy imperatives, even the Nbsap, it's calling for an all of society. So conservation happens in your backyard. So I really liked that statement from the Princess, in that you feel conservation every day. It's what's around you. It's the access to green space. And we want to actually make sure that that conservation doesn't only exist inside protected areas. So that's where we're coming with this mega living landscape approach. I think you've heard it. It's really trying to create these areas where, you can make a living, but you still have the benefits of conservation. And to do that means we're going to have to do a lot more in terms of conservation financing. So this is the more sort of nuanced map of where those corridors will have been identified. And they've really sort of been identified in areas which are biodiversity sensitive or rich, and we can actually try to drive a really sustainable biodiversity economy in these areas. So we then went with the challenge currently facing us, and we said, okay, what do we now need to do in terms of financial sustainability? And I think a strategy is important in that sometimes we think it's everything. It's sort of like the golden sort of key to unlock everything. But it is really it's being decided and intentional about what you're going to concentrate on and what are you going to say that this is not at the moment a priority. And so we've identified 5 pillars in our financial sustainability strategy. The 2 of them, pillar 1 and pillar 5, speaks to the things that we do well. So we know we do tourism well, and we need to find a way in which we can enhance that revenue from tourism. We know that we have a very rich natural asset base. We're rich in natural capital. We need to find a way in which we can monetize that good work that we do. Then we've got to find ways, pillar 2 and pillar 4, we've got to find ways in which we can attract new sources of funding. And so these new sources of funding, the one is around sort of mobilizing external funds. So we've got to be thinking about pillar 4, how do we actually bring more partnerships on board? People spoke about the GEF. We spoke about the GBFF. There's lots of funding out there. There's a lot of philanthropic funding that's out there. But we've got to find enabling mechanisms in which to channel it through. Those funders are often looking for metrics that talk to what they need to report on. So we need to be clear about what are those metrics of success. So no longer can we just measure activity done, but we've got to actually say what impact it's having on the ground. And so that will enable us to unlock that area of external funds. Then there's this issue around operational efficiency. So we understand, even in sand parks, I think Mr. Nkosi spoke about this, up to 90% of our expenditure is on human resources. That's not sustainable. I think we all in the room can agree that it's not sustainable. No one runs a business that way where 90% is HR. Because when you do that, you neglect the things that keep the money flowing to continue to hire the people. So that's really, the operational efficiency is key. And then sitting at the very key enabler is about sustainable investing. How you invest back into your business, back into your plant in a way that makes the most sense. So those are the sort of areas of our financial sustainability. This is a little bit going into the parks that make revenue and the parks that take revenue, but really we've got 4 parks. We know that we've put them into these quadrants of destination attractiveness and then market growth potential. And so we know some parks, in terms of return on investment, they do well. They're not necessarily generating a surplus, but they do well. So there's an opportunity there to increase the market share and to maintain that leadership status. Parks like Kruger, Table Mountain, we know about them. But surprising, sometimes West Coast Garden Route, we know they have high destination attractiveness. There we can do more to position those parks for revenue generation. We've got parks in the bottom right-hand side, which talks to these parks have high destination attractiveness, but they don't necessarily have the infrastructure, etc. They don't have the people that they're attracting. Here we can potentially build partnerships. Same as the area on the left-hand side bottom, is that here we may actually think here it may not be the best model for us to invest in infrastructure, but if we can partner with other entities, we can partner with private sector through PPPs, etc., we can create viable business to unburden those core performing parks. So we're thinking about how we're growing the state, and so we've got to be starting to think about our sort of conservation entities as not just protecting the butterflies and the birds, but how are they going to be viably funded to keep that good conservation work going. Operational efficiency, so we went and looked at where's our expenses going, and we know you can sort of keep that flow of funds coming, but if you've got major, leaks in the piping and you're leaking funding, it's going to actually mean that that funding is not going where you want it to go. So we've got to address some of these areas around personnel costs. So we've got to see where we can share services, how we can optimize human capital, how we can skill, reskill, upskill people so that they can. The world of work is changing. We know that there's a whole lot of opportunity that automation sort of brings, digitization brings, and we need to sort of leverage that where possible. We're thinking about telematics, fleet management, EV fleets, where we can reduce the cost of that's a big cost for us. We need to actually really understand what's driving costs, kilometers, fuel usage, etc., and how we can bring that down. PV and solar, so we know that Eskom's a big part of our bill, and it's not good for our carbon emissions either. So we're looking at ways in which we can decarbonize our operations while getting that. So decarbonization and PV, etc. It's not just about carbon. It's also because it's a cost-effective option. The cost of PV, the cost of renewable energy, is becoming really competitive. So it makes it's a good financial decision that you're making when you're deciding to do those transformations or transitions. And then a lot around sort of digitization of work. So those are really around the operational efficiency. The next pillar is around this keystone enablers, investing in your organization, investing in your company. So you've got to think about, okay, so we've looked at it, and we see that this decades of underinvestment, we said it's 10 billion rand, it's roads infrastructure, it's bridges, it's civils, it's buildings, it's staff accommodation. That is your unlocker. Infrastructure is your unlocker of conservation. So built infrastructure then becomes your unlocker of conservation of ecosystems. And so we really are looking at, and when we're thinking about that green infrastructure sitting on the roof of our building, we're sort of really thinking that we need to build back better. Everyone says it, the last floods in Kruger, build back better. But when the insurances only pay about a quarter of the total loss of infrastructure, then you've got to think about where you're going to get this additional funding. And so funding exists, but we need to sort of also be willing to take on other modalities of funding, concessional loans, debt finance. Those become instruments, especially for infrastructure, that we need to be moving into. Because that amount, 10 billion rand, is not in the realm of grant finance, so it's not in the realm of a government grant. So we have to think about how do we bring on different instruments to fund these infrastructure shortfalls. The structure, just in terms of enterprise risk management, how you're managing your risk, how do you sort of forecast risk, how do you address risk before it becomes a risk? That's really sort of having an enterprise risk management system that is able to be preemptive and allow us to sort of to understand where our risk lies and to be able to plug that risk before it actually materializes. And then, of course, there's these enabling mechanisms. So an enabling mechanism, and we'll talk a little bit about it at the end, it's about, Mr. Nkosi, you spoke about the structuring of these organizations, and structuring is important. The form of the organization in terms of how it receives funding, how it spends funding is important, and those are areas that we're looking into. So when we think now, I've got about 5 minutes. I think I'm good still. So when we're thinking about pillars 4 and 5. I've already alluded to some of these areas around mobilizing external funding. So it's, when we think about these external funds, especially things, we've got some experience now with impact bonds. We were just from a meeting with World Bank on the Rhino bond and thinking about how do we take it forward. There's been the water bond that's been launched in South Africa. South Africa is really leading the way in terms of really novel and innovative funding mechanisms. And often once you've seen one happen, then others we've got a private bank now that's taking on issuing of outcomes bonds. So RMB First Rand Foundation, and so it's really good to see that these are commercially viable sort of products, initially sort of led by DFI, by Development Bank, but then sort of leading the way to others to sort of say, let's build on that, let's create portfolios of bonds so that we start to get investors investing in nature. Our fifth sort of pillar is around this accessing alternative funding. And this is really around using the good work that we do. So EPWP is a fantastic program of government, achieving both social outcomes as well as environmental outcomes. But we knew for a while that we needed to find alternative ways in which we could start to co-finance those programs. And I think things like biodiversity credits, carbon credits, offset banking allows for you to start to monetize some of the work that you're doing anyway. So not just being reliant on the government grant. That government grant is supposed to be almost like a seed grant that allows us to innovate around other areas. And so that's what we're starting to do. It's really South Africa has also registered various sort of carbon projects, which is good to see, carbon credit projects. So we're already moving into that space. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. I think I've covered it. I think that when we sort of think about this natural capital that sort of sits in our protected areas, in sandparks alone, 4 million hectares in this state, it has all this ability to sequester carbon. When we've seen, when you formally protect an area, when you restore an area, it increases the ability to sequester carbon, not just in the above ground biomass, but in the soil biomass, underground soil carbon. And we can use that. Those are high integrity carbon credits that people want to buy. So we've got to sort of find ways that we can easily, with our entities, our provincial entities, etc., monetize that ability of protected ecosystems to deliver on sort of climate mitigation. We also sort of think a little bit about then about the biodiversity offset banks. We know development needs to happen. We proactively need to identify areas that development can offset their residual impact. And so that's what the bank allows you to do. So it's really sort of, it's quite an innovative mechanism that allows, conservation often is said to be the one that it's like a cog in the wheel, right? But it slows down progress. Because development needs to happen, and then, oh no, we've got to sort of, we need to get an offset, but there isn't an offset. How do we identify like for like? And so this is really trying to proactively say, here's some offsets that have already been identified in these different ecosystem types, credits available, and so a developer can then offset their residual impact with an offset. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. Sandparks is a Schedule 3A entity. There's a possibility of a 3B. Those offer different sort of opportunities. And we've got to be thinking about the form of the organization in terms of positioning us in terms of moving forward, especially to try to attract alternative sources of funding and to run as an efficient business. Because what we've been talking about up until now is really it's about business principles, and so is our form going to match that? Everything has to be already talking to climate risk. We're seeing climate risk take place now, so we can't be thinking about it tomorrow. It's actually today, it's happening today. Of course, we need to build an implementation roadmap for the next few years, identify what's the quick wins, what are the things we start now. Quick wins are not always just the easiest things to do. Sometimes it's the building blocks for actual those long-term sustainability initiatives. So that's where we are. So ecological impact equals biological mandate, all the good conservation work, but also financial agility. And so we've got to be thinking about both of that. And as our sort of public sort of entities, our provincial entities move into that space, we've got to sort of enable them to be able to play in that space, not have systems that are, that are a little bit still from a grant finance sort of base when we need them to sort of start to be a self-generating. So that's our sort of plan for the next 20 years. Of course, nothing is, it's a strategy, it's things we want to do. It's nothing we can do on our own. We look forward to sort of partnering with everyone in the room, because I think that someone said it early on in the reflection. You're not just stakeholders, you're partners, and we want to see you come on board to sort of make this possible for South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny, for sharing what Sandparks is doing when it comes to financial models. Can we give all the presenters in this session another round of applause, please? We will now open the floor for discussions. My take from me really is how do we build resilient financial sustainability, especially in conservation. And I can think of few things in terms of how do we evaluate these models in terms of, for example, assessing revenue diversification market potential. Denny talked about blended finance, which I think talks to this diversification, and really looking into our revenue mechanism and the cost structure. She also touched on looking into risk mitigation strategies as we transition into these business models. And the challenging one, again, for me is in terms of, looking at our governance, evaluate our governance, especially the legal frameworks, because most of the time we want to transition into these business models and sustainability, but somehow we get restricted by our frameworks. So it is really important to think as we transition from the way we used to do conservation into, more thinking about the business approach. I'm gonna open the floor for discussions, colleagues, and I'm gonna stretch you a little bit. If you need to have tea, I think colleagues can go and grab tea while we continue with discussions. We'll break at 1. It's not my fault, it's not anyone's fault, but we started very late. So if you need tea, I think let's grab tea and continue discussing. So I'm gonna ask colleagues with the mics just to identify colleagues on the floor. I'll start there on the right side. I see the hand.
Second one.
And there is one at the back, one in the middle, and one. Let's take those 5 and one in front, and then we'll come to you, my brother. I will be the first in the next session. Thank you. You can start at the back.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lizanne Nell. I'm the Conservation Manager for SA Hunters and Game Conservation Association. I must say, when I listened to the plans on sustainable financing, the area that I found lacking was the contribution of the wildlife sector as a sustainable financing model. We know that most of our biodiversity falls outside of protected areas, and in those areas, private sector and communities play a very big role in securing wildlife habitats and threatened species, and we've seen that with species like the bontebok, for example. The SWEP project that was done recently in the Eastern Cape, for instance, indicated that the wildlife sector, in that specific study, 82% of the participants had funding invested in rehabilitation of landscapes. 48% of them did structural erosion control. 87% invested in alien invasive clearing and bush encroachment, which demonstrates that the wildlife sector plays a major role in biodiversity conservation. The area under management of the sector is about 20 million hectares of wildlife habitats. Now, most of these areas have various sources of income that sustain them, but most of them are financially viable. One of the income streams, for instance, for these areas is responsible, legal, regulated hunting. And hunting has generated about 44 billion to the economy annually. Most of that income is generated from local citizen hunting that hunt for meat. So in all of this assessments that we're doing, I haven't seen us quantify this contribution of the wildlife economy in securing biodiversity, and I think it's an area that really needs attention going forward.
Absolutely. Can we take the second question?
Thank you. It's Makosi Kabashe. I'll start with Sandparks. I was a little bit shocked to see Sandparks put a presentation up which had nothing on Vision 2040 except one slide. It's a concern because that is supposed to be driving a particular drive for the country in terms of implementing that sustainable use policy. And when it starts receding, when Sandpark speaks, I think we have a problem of continuity, which is the problem of government. The second thing for Sandparks is I see the carbon offsets, the carbon credit opportunities that you've identified for your parks. What about the inclusion of the communities around the parks? Because those communities are actually an integral and critical partner in this carbon capture. So if there's an opportunity for them to also be able to, and I hate this word benefit because people take it as if you're doing us a favor, is that it's also an opportunity for them to access those green funds, to make money on their land that they own, because they are also quite big contributors towards a conservation. I think the speaker before me touches a little bit on what I wanted, in that she's able to quote statistics for the hunting industry. And yet there isn't a concerted effort of quantifying what communities actually do. And until our information is presented on equal footing there will always be an undervaluing of the contribution of communities. So I do think there needs to be a concerted effort to include statistics about the role that the communities are playing within this. So when you're collecting data and are doing surveys, next time, can we please see the surveying that is done with and by communities in their areas, so that they not only become somebody else's participants, but are actively doing their own research and counting and monitoring to make sure that those billions that are put there for this, for the change, for the 30 by 30, they are also able to tangibly show what has actually happened in their spaces. If we don't do that, even yesterday, there were numbers that were put there. I think it was $65 million that has been, that's a lot of money. But how are we showing how that money actually gets to be spent and filters through into the communities who are on the ground? The last one for me on the Biodiversity Finance Initiative is that the costs of stewardship, I don't know how countries are actually valuing that or accounting for it in all of these other numbers that get thrown around. Because it costs you to preserve your land and choose not to mine, if I can be blatant. And yet if someone was buying that land from a private landowner, there would be a commercial exchange which has that land valued. But the same is not done for the communities who actually keep their land. And I do think that for social justice purposes, all of that needs to come into those biodiversity finance initiatives. For as long as communities are not represented there as active participants and their contributions measured, costed, I think it will always be an incomplete and unbalanced accounting. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Kevin Mart, People and Parks, Western Cape. I actually again want to affirm the People and Parks support for the national effort to align with the KMGBF. But it's critical that we understand when you talk about Nbsap and you talk about the financial inclusion or financial viability, that we should look at target 19 that talks about inclusive finance systems. And for us, it is important at People and Parks that inclusion is not only symbolic, but it must be practical. And I think my colleague also spoke about it earlier, and of course you also now refer to that communities are currently already financing biodiversity through unpaid stewardship, cultural governance, and also local environment that we are currently sacrificing in terms of biodiversity. But if I look at your BER, your Biodiversity Expenditure Review, it makes me a little worried because communities is still not funded, and actually their activities are not costed within that budget expenditure review. So what will biodiversity finance that is viable and inclusive looks like in 2036, according to me, is that where a system is implemented where communities are co-governing, they are receiving direct financing, and they are recognized as equal partners in stewardship, as my previous partner also has alluded to. What I'm worried about the BER is also that conservation is still funded and governed through colonial patterns, and we at People and Parks have a very strong urge to decolonize this whole conservation agenda, and with that finance system should also look at decolonizing that colonial patterns that is currently there. As I said, communities are still carrying the heaviest burden, and what I'm also worried of, the BR showed it again, that they are undercosting, like the PIR, the FNA, and also your BFP. They are all undercosting and undervaluing community stewardship. And without community finance, the biodiversity financial plan will fail, morally and also practically. I think the same thing applies to sandparks, because where they are currently struggling to make ends meet, according to them, but I don't know about that because they've declared a huge profit in the 2024 and 25 financial year. But that mismatch should be interrogated. But for me important, and I want to close with that one, is the transformation engine within even sandparks cannot run on conservation alone. It must run on community rights, restitution, and also shared governance.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is Boyd Escott here from Cape Nature. I just had a few questions. I'll do the very quick ones first. Regarding the biofinance, I just wanted to know if it's possible to put comments onto the documents. The second is a question on the protected area case studies. Just clarity required as to why only 5 provinces were, a review of 5 was done and not all 9, so we could get a comprehensive standpoint from a national point of view. The third question, sandparks, with the mega living landscape. I just wanted to know if the prioritization that they had identified through, and we saw them in the maps on the top, if they had taken provincial priorities into account, just so that there's not misalignment, especially since all the provinces are practicing stewardship and have been doing so for over 20 years in some cases. looking at exactly the same questions which have been raised and put forward here. And then my final question, which is the large one, but is more pertinent and related to what the previous speakers have said, and again relates to biodiversity finance. As was noted, that the income stream is usually sort of passive in a sense, in that we rely on grants and funds and things, and we need to have greater positive, proactive investment coming through. Some examples have already been listed by in comments earlier, which could be considered. But I was wanting to know if it's why we can't put forward a more practical sort of business case for following this aspect. Everyone keeps indicating what the costs are and how much money we need. But the value itself hasn't yet been, I think, correctly quantified. In the sense here, the report refers to the cost of interaction or non-interaction, and it relates to water security, agricultural risk, tourism losses, climate vulnerability, and health impacts. The one thing it didn't do was show what the actual financial implications of investing in ecological infrastructure and reserves will have as positive spin-offs on mitigating against all of those. So by way of example, we can monitor how current costs are reduced in hospitals because we have better, better or healthier populations. They're not experiencing as many diseases and outbreaks and things like that. Reduced the reduced need or reliance on serious water treatments because we've got healthier rivers, reduced insurance costs because we've got well-managed river networks and wetlands. So infrastructure downstream is less likely to be damaged. Increased property prices because of proximity to reserves. People want to go there, so we get a benefit from there. And then the easiest one, I think, is just to quantify the taxes and the jobs leveraged from businesses that are dependent on conservation areas and green belts for their existence. So these are not the direct one-on-one interactions, but it's the indirect links. So you would have a tour group going around to reserves, earning money, sustaining jobs, but they wouldn't be able to exist without the reserves being there. So when we get to see all of those positives versus the costs, a more positive cost-benefit analysis can be done, and therefore can strengthen the case for further investment in the sector in general. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you. Can we take one last question and then we can go for a second round? There's a gentleman here with a blue jersey. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let's take that, the one in front, and then we can go for the second round. Sorry for that.
Okay, thank you. Alana Rebello here. I just want to thank Sandparks, especially for their very eloquent presentation, and it allowed us to see some detail, which was useful. In terms of financing and expenditure, we've heard some interesting statistics today, particularly the expenditure on human capital. I think the ideas in terms of potential external funding mechanisms are great, but I think it would also be nice to see some of the detail around internal funding fleshed out a little bit more. I appreciated the pillar on aggressive optimization or internal efficiency, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what that exactly involves. So, for example, the challenges around procurement in running these parks, lack of cost effectiveness, not being able to get anything done. In my experience, for example, in Table Mountain National Park, where volunteers are bearing the brunt of the costs, actually, of running the parks. Trail maintenance, alien tree clearing, there are a number of organizations that are doing that in the parks because governments can't mobilize fast enough due to largely procurement issues. So just tackling the elephant in the room. When is this issue going to get resolved so that we can improve efficiency and actually get cost effectiveness in our expenditure? Another example is in Mangalisio and the challenges and the state of the facilities. The second point that I want to raise is about NRM programs. There was a Daily Maverick article on the 6th of April. I'm not sure if people are aware of it, but they focused on the funding cuts to the Working for Water initiative. And they said that the DEFI maintains that its budget cuts to this program and related biocontrol work, which happened under Minister Barbara Creasy in 2020, was in response to post-COVID budget belt tightening by the Treasury. But the department financial records tell a different story. There was a change in spending priorities under the Creasy administration rather than a shortage of cash. And they go into details in this article. So I think everybody here is aware of the massive impact this has had on the ground in terms of alien tree clearing, in terms of biocontrol. And so I think under these kinds of funding initiatives, I would personally like to see what's being done to redress that. How will we actually achieve these global biodiversity targets without those NRM programs? We really do need action on the ground, and I saw a lack of representation of that in the target indicators yesterday, and that flows through to the funding ideas as well. Just one note as an academic on carbon credits. So these are really only possible when you're doing something beyond the status quo. They won't fund business as usual. So normal park maintenance is not going to be valid. However, there's a lot of potential for carbon credits still on the borders of the parks where there's alien tree infestations. But I also think that there's a lack of understanding around carbon sequestration in South Africa. I think this even translates into the Nbsap as it stands right now. There's literally a target indicator for plantations. It says by 2035 that we will maintain at least 80% of commercial plantation forest area under independently verified sustainable forest management certification schemes. But in terms of carbon, are we aware of the recent research that's demonstrating how trees, particularly in African fire-prone ecosystems, negatively impact carbon sequestration? So soil stores of carbon, so that's the root stocks, microbes, and also soil carbon, have been shown to be more important than above ground carbon stores, especially in our fire-prone ecosystems where everything above the ground is incinerated. So I think in South Africa we should be celebrating things like our savannas, our grasslands, our shrublands, but I see still an overemphasis on trees. And this is in contravention of their biodiversity and carbon impacts. So instead of supporting global tree planting initiatives, we should be thinking about proudly South African initiatives. A previous gentleman here mentioned decolonization, and I think that this tree narrative is an example where we need to decolonize. So if we get our ecology right, I think that the funding will also flow. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We only had 30 minutes for discussion, so I see getting myself into trouble here, but we're going to have another another last round of questions. But let's try and address some of the few questions that came from the floor. I will start with the first one, maybe. Maybe our DFFE colleagues and just other colleagues who presented can also maybe respond to that in terms of reflecting on the wildlife sector, especially outside protected areas. I think there was a mention in terms of stats there, for example, 82% participation from that sector, and also I think, if I'm right, contribution in terms of project related to rehabilitation and their contribution also into the wildlife sector. 44 billion that is actually generated from hunting. So that was the question, and I think Letitia can also maybe respond to that if she is in the room, and other colleagues in terms of wildlife sector and the contribution. Any take, colleagues, presenters, DFFE?
Thanks, Chair. I thought maybe I'll dispose of the question that was directly related to the why only 5 provinces out of the 9. And I think it's quite a valid question, but you know, we follow the basic principles when one undertakes research, that when you do that, you identify your sample, and out of which you are able to correlate your data in terms of patterns and trends, just to understand what the bigger picture is in terms of these aspects. So that's what we did, and we were quite comfortable with the sample that we use for such work. And we are in discussions with the other provinces to deal with the second part of this work, so that ultimately we get a full report on the matter. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any response from the floor? I will take, okay, Tate. Yeah, you can take Dr. Matibe.
Thanks very much, Program Director. I think in relation to the confirmation of statistics as it relates to wildlife contribution to our economy, it's important to mention that there is a whole lot of work around wildlife economy in particular, but also biodiversity economy in general. Needless to say that we have undertaken a posture that we need to then institutionalize statistics as it relates to wildlife and biodiversity economy within the space of Stats SA. So as we speak, we are in collaboration with Stats SA and SANBI, our entity, so that we can then, by 2028, in 2 years' time, launch what we call BESA, Biodiversity Economy Satellite Account, so that when Tatana Risenga Maluleke, when he announced quarterly statistics, he can be able to say, biodiversity sector has contributed so much to the economy. The same way we have done with tourism. As you know, every time when Risenga announced the quarterly statistics, he also incorporate the ones for tourism, because we do have a tourism satellite account. So that work is underway, and it's actually happening en masse, and we believe, and as confirmed by Stats SA, that by 2028, our satellite account will be launched officially, and then we won't have challenges with statistics. But in the meantime, Chair, as I said, various research have shown, and one of those was done by our professors at the Northwest University, which then confirms that for a long time we have been benchmarking the contribution of hunting at around 20 billion, with majority of that amount coming from domestic hunting, which sometimes people call biltong hunting. Now, when they did the multiplier effect of what that hunting does, they then found that in effect, it's actually 44 billion and supporting 95,000 jobs in the Republic. How it happens is that in a hunting season, a domestic hunter spends between 58 and 65,000 rand per hunter during hunting season. Whereas an international hunter spends between 350 to 444,000 during the hunting season. And I'm talking about an individual hunter. So that's why you will see the proliferation of the figures going to that amount of 44 billion. So it's not a small player, the wildlife sector. And as you might be aware, tourism generates around 216 to 225 billion to the economy and support about 1.6 to 1.8 million jobs. And out of that statistics, 12.8% is contributed by what we call nature-based tourism, which means bio-based tourism, those who want to enjoy nature. And in that respect, we contribute as a sector towards tourism total figure about 28 billion per annum. And that figure keeps on rising because South Africa keeps on contributing more going forward. But in essence, in summary, is that we are having a situation wherein, as a sector, as indicated by Sanbi, we employ close to 500 million, close to 500 million people, just over 400. And out of that, we have got a subsectoral division of what is the area which is a major contributor of that statistics. It's about 256,000 of those jobs of 418,000. Did I say 418 million? No, 418,000 jobs. Sorry. Yes. So basically, out of that, the majority comes from extractive use of biodiversity, which is fishing, which is a harvesting of indigenous species of plants for medicinal, pharmaceutical, or nutraceutical use. So in essence, we are a role player in the economy, but it will then be affirmed by 2028 when we've got our own satellite account. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntate Matibe, for that detailed account. Colleagues, I will have to apologize. We have a very slight change in our program. Can we hold the questions for now? We have Ms. Moho Mataba from DBSA, who has another commitment at 1 o'clock, and her presentation should come now. So I will request that we allow her to do a presentation, and then we can come back to the remaining questions. Thank you very much for your understanding. Can we give a round of applause to Ms. Moho while she's coming to the stage? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. All protocols observed. My name is Moho Mataba from the Development Bank of Southern Africa, and I will be providing a brief overview of what we do at DBSA and also our work in the biodiversity space. So DBSA is owned 100% by the South African government, but we have a mandate to invest across the entire continent. So we don't get fiscal allocation from government, but we raise money from the capital markets. So our core business is in the development of infrastructure in various sectors, and we invest both in the public sector. We work preeminently with the municipalities, and also in the private sector. We work with SMMEs and other large corporates. So due to the extensive work that we do with the municipalities, our role is to really walk the journey with them, from assisting them with their infrastructure plans to providing funding for project preparation, for capacity building, technical assistance. And when the projects are ready, then we deploy mainstream financing towards the implementation of those projects. We also have a team of engineers in the bank who work with municipalities to help implement the projects, and also the maintenance of the assets, because sometimes we find that even though the municipalities have funds, they don't have the capacity to actually implement So in the climate finance space, our journey started with a grant that we obtained from DFFE, where we established the Green Fund, and the traction that we built through the Green Fund then enabled us to get accreditation with the GCF and with the JEF. And we're also a member of the IDFC, which is the International Development Finance Club, which operates globally with select DFIs. And we're also a member of the Biodiversity Credit Alliance. So when it comes to biodiversity, we really see our role as very central to this. So our main targets within the bank are to grow cross-capital formation. And what this means is growing the capacity within the country and within the region of man-made productive assets, right? And here we are talking infrastructure as you know it, buildings, road infrastructure, energy infrastructure, equipment, etc. But we do understand that this has got to be developed in a sustainable manner. So we also are looking to ramp up our exposure on the natural capital side. I think previous speakers have spoken extensively on the natural capital assets that we have in South Africa, and I think Sanvi yesterday also made an example of how the industries depend on biodiversity, making an example of the agricultural sector. So with that said, obviously given that we raise our capital from the capital markets, our investment has to be profitable, right? So hence the importance of coupling nature or biodiversity with great infrastructure then becomes important, because I think one of the previous from yesterday also highlighted that it's important to move away from pure grants. We need to look at innovative financing models that will enable biodiversity projects to become more sustainable. And so with that said, we play a role of providing financing for biodiversity projects and also catalyzing additional funding from international investors and other lenders locally in the country to co-lend with us, and also just developing a pipeline of bankable projects to be implemented in the country and across the region in order to advance the impact. However, the challenge that we see is that there's a chasm between the financial ecosystem and project developers. The investors on the one hand say there are no bankable projects, there are no projects, there's a lot of funding that's available, but the projects are not there. But on the other hand, you have project developers who say there's no funding. We have projects, but there's no funding. So there's a gap somewhere in between. And the reason for that is the projects that are available, they are not designed or structured in a way that is attractive to the investors or suitable for investors to participate. Hence, as a DFI, we understand both languages spoken by the project developers and also by our financier counterparts, and also have strong links with governments, and we understand the targets that need to be met by governments from a climate and nature perspective, and we see our role in assisting and advancing achievement of those targets. Hence, we have taken it upon ourselves to ensure that we assist in this regard. And how we assist is we design de-risking financing models that enable private sector to participate in projects that would have otherwise been viewed as unbankable. And we're able to do this through the concessional funding that we obtain from climate funds such as JEF, GCF, UK Pact, EKI, and others. So this concessional funding allows us to provide first loss mechanisms which then absorb a lot of risk, hence enabling the private sector to now participate because the projects have been sufficiently de-risked, and this unlocks the potential in the underserved markets, such as the biodiversity market. And another important element is just crowding in private capital, as I indicated earlier. And in fact, these climate funds, the JEF and the GCF, they really keep on emphasizing the importance of crowding in private capital, because the public funds globally are dwindling. They continue to shrink, especially with the geopolitical tensions that are happening right now. So it then makes it very important for us to blend this public funds as much as possible with other additional resources from private sector in order to extend the dollar basically and cover as much as possible, as opposed to following the normal approach that we've been following of funding biodiversity projects purely through grants. And over and above that, this then requires us to innovate, right? So product innovation becomes very important. We innovate not only when it comes to the type of projects that we implement, the structuring of the projects that we implement, but also on the financial side as well. Hence, we had to pilot new funding products in order to ensure that the funding products that we deploy to biodiversity projects are suited for this kind of projects. The traditional funding products, such as your normal loans, they're not really suited for biodiversity projects, because biodiversity projects typically take long to implement, and there are always challenges that are brought about by nature that are really outside of the control of anyone. So we need funding structures that are flexible and that are able to accommodate those kind of unknowns and risks. And I did highlight also the importance of just building a pipeline of bankable projects. And what we do in this space is we pilot a number of new innovative projects with a lot of partners that are also present here amongst us today. We've got projects with the Western Cape government, projects with the Nature Conservancy, projects with UNDP, UNEP. We're really doing our role and our best in terms of innovating, testing what works so that we can scale up concepts and projects that have proven to be successful. And we also do this in partnership with other stakeholders as well. I mean, we've got good collaborations with the French Development Bank, for example, and other partners who walk this journey with us and co-lend with us in this pilot project. So I'm just going to go a little bit deeper on the de-risking mechanisms for those that are interested. So we have been talking about de-risking. De-risking is very important to de-risk in order to attract private sector. But how do we actually do this? So we do this by ensuring that we design customized financial mechanisms that are aimed to unlock the potential that we see in the underserved market, right? And we do this by ensuring that we embed and we integrate credit enhancement features in these facilities. So we talked about how biodiversity needs patient funding, so we'll build in long tenors in the design of our facilities, and the commercial banks do like this because it means that they will be paid out before everyone else gets out. So maybe if I can explain this on this element. When it comes to commercial banks, maturity, which is the loan tenure, becomes very important because that is basically the profitability of the bank, and it also talks to the risk exposure of the bank. The longer the bank stays in a project, the more risky it becomes because you can't predict what happens beyond 10 years or beyond 20 years. So you'll find that most investment facilities will be limited to funding up to 8 years, for example. So when we provide longer tenure, then it means that the project will still be sustainable, will continue beyond 8 years because of our facilities, but the commercial bank will be paid out before that then. So then it becomes more attractive. We also build in concessional interest rates to make the pricing cheaper, and also take a subordinated position in the capital structure, which means that we will rank below the commercial bank, and hence when it comes to the repayments, they get paid out first. When it comes to liquidation, they get paid out first. So this makes the project more attractive to them. And we also provide some first loss risk sharing mechanisms, such as your guarantees, so that should things go south, the commercial bank is covered, and this then attracts them to co-lend with us into the project. I think I talked about the customized programs that we put in place, but maybe just to highlight that with the projects that we pilot, our aim is to actually follow a programmatic approach whereby we will be able to support multiple projects as opposed to piloting one project. Some of you who may have been engaged with the GCF process, for example, the GEF process, you may know that it takes long to secure funding. So by us designing programs under which we can support multiple projects, then it makes it easier for us to support projects without having to go back every single time. So we want to follow that approach. And some of the innovative instruments that we have piloted include outcome-based bonds. I think UNDP mentioned the water bond, for example, which I'll talk about a bit later. But we're also piloting one that focuses on heat resilience, assisting communities to adapt to the to heat stress. And we will be using nature-based solutions to improve the cooling systems and in order to reduce the heat stress. And we will be prioritizing those municipalities that have got hotspots, that are basically hotspots in the country when it comes to heat stress. So we look forward to that one. It's still in the earlier stages of development. And we're also exploring biodiversity credits, carbon credits. We have a project with the Western Cape government that is under project preparation, where we're looking at developing biodiversity credit and offset mechanisms that can assist communities to earn a living out of their natural resources. And another important element is that we are developing nature-positive infrastructure projects as opposed to developing and investing in grey infrastructure projects as we've been doing for many years. We want to integrate biodiversity elements into the design of this project. One of the projects that we have in our pipeline is looking at a dam desilting, where we are removing the debris that accumulates in a dam in order to improve the holding capacity of that dam, but also while rehabilitating a wetland that feeds water into this dam and also reduces the erosion, soil erosion into the dam, while also securing the water capacity of this wetland. So we hope that in the future, this is the only way that we'll be doing business in the financial ecosystem, but we are currently piloting. And another important element is just creating an evidence base upon which private sector can now refer to and invest comfortably. There was a time when solar, like PV solar infrastructure was viewed in the same light that we view biodiversity right now, because a lot was not well understood. But with time and with the data that was gathered in the space, we've now gotten to a place where private sector can comfortably invest in solar energy. So while right now investing in biodiversity is not really viewed as bankable by most investors, in the future this will be different. This will be different. This is what we believe in. So we are looking to establish a biodiversity investment facility, which we have been very thankful to have been supported by DFFE and also UNDP BioFin for the project preparation of this facility. So I think the DTG made reference to the need to establish a biodiversity fund, and we're already making strides in terms of putting this in place. We've completed the project preparation phase, and we're now looking to start the fundraising process. We'll be engaging with multiple investors to co-invest with us to capitalize this facility alongside us, and we are targeting 300 million USD for this facility, and we will be supporting broader projects or focal areas within the biodiversity sector. we really aim to be as broad as possible so that we don't leave any sector behind. And because of that, it might make fundraising difficult because we are too broad, but that's the challenge that we're ready to take. And when it comes to the type of instruments that we'll be deploying, we also aim to be as broad as possible. Normally, when we set up this kind of facilities, you'll find that it will be a facility that provides a subordinated debt instrument, or it will be an equity facility. But with this one, we want to be broad and to be able to deploy different types of instruments, blended instruments. So for one project, we may provide a pure grant. For another, it will be a recoverable grant. For the next one, it might be a blend of a grant and a concessional loan, depending on the nature of the project. So the type of the blending and the capital structure that we deploy to the project will be customized to the need and the capacity of the underlying project. So innovation will form a big part of this facility. However, it will be broken down into two phases. So we want to start with a pilot that will be up to the value of $75 million. And then the second phase will then be where we scale up this project, and we're looking at around 225 million for the second phase. So we are now we have started engagements with the donor countries, the bilateral engagements with DFIs. We also want to ramp up our discussions with philanthropic organizations that are interested in this sector. And as I indicated earlier, flexibility when it comes to the deployment of the capital is important. So we'll keep it very broad and to allow for that flexibility. So part of the funding will focus on technical assistance, where we're looking at capacity building and pipeline development, because as I highlighted earlier, most of the investment opportunities are not really fully developed. So there's still a need to provide additional support to ensure that they are structured appropriately for investors to come in. So part of the grant will be looking at that. And then part of the grant will also be looking at supporting those projects that have got low potential to actually generate revenue but are important. And then the next window will then look at those projects that have got potential to actually generate revenue. So we will be blending this funding with additional capital from our own balance sheet, but also from other lenders as well who are keen to partner with us. I am literally left with 1 minute. But anyway, let me just talk about, just as an example, the Cape Water bond that UNDP made reference to, that was concluded in March, at the end of March. So the bond was listed on JSE last month in April, and it's led by RMB in partnership with ourselves and the Nature Conservancy, Conservation Alpha, IFC, and other stakeholders as well. And it's an innovative blended finance mechanism that aims to enhance the restoration of ecological infrastructure in South Africa in order to improve water security in the Western Cape, because we know the challenges that we face when it comes to water scarcity in that region. So the main activity will be looking at clearing invasive alien species in the strategic water resource areas. So it is the first nature-based bond to ever be launched and issued in Africa. So we're really excited to seeing this evolve and just seeing the impact that's going to come out of it. Next steps, I am behind my time actually. So the next steps, we have received, a lot of support internally within DBSA to actually do more in this space, and we're now looking to strengthen our capacity within the bank, and this is underway, and UNDP is also supporting us on this front, and we will be doing further development in terms of last mile design for the biodiversity facilities, because obviously we have to take into consideration the feedback and the insights from the lenders who are now looking to partner with us. We have to incorporate their needs into how we design this facility, and the most important element is the capital raising part, where we'll be doing a roadshow, engaging widely with different types of investors, including high net worth individuals, because they've also participated in the water bond. So we'll be engaging widely in terms of our fundraising efforts and strengthening our collaboration with our strategic partners that we already have, the GEF, the GCF, UNDP, TNC, and others, NGOs, civil society organizations, as well as they are the custodians of the land in the region. And then the last mile will then be to launch the facility. Thank you.
Another round of applause, colleagues, for that presentation. You know, I have my suspicions. You know, when your principals wants to sort you out, they give you a very difficult program to run, so you get yourself into trouble. And I can see that we facilitating a very exciting program, and there are a lot of questions coming from the floor. And we did make commitment as government that we want inclusivity, we want people to participate, and I can see that we've been having this kind of engagement in these sessions. And there are still few questions, I think, that were on the ground, on the floor, to attend to. So one specifically on sandparks. I think Vision 2040 is still new on our minds, and there was a question on that, on, you know, how we integrate this Vision 2040, especially around the mega living landscape and those priority areas. So I will request a colleague who had a question on sandparks and mega living landscape and Vision 2040 to just engage with myself and Denny because of time. But there are still those three key priority areas in the mega living landscape: the Greater Adu, the Greater Kruger National Park, the Eastern Cape Grassland, and we recently added the arid one, that is the Namakwa and the Ugrabis mega living landscape node that we're still working on. And I think there is a lot of work going on there, Denny, but you can engage with us in terms of progress on Vision 2040. Other questions were really still around, you know, the financing, biodiversity expenditure review, and I think some of the questions will be addressed by the next presentation. So I will suggest that those questions related to biodiversity expenditure review, that we give chance to the next speaker to actually present, and then we'll still gonna get into another plenary we're supposed to be between 12 and 1, and I think we still have enough time to get into those burning questions around finances. So if you allow me, colleagues, I would like now to call Eva from UNDP to, I think, provide that presentation that is also, I think, following on the earlier presentation by Ms. Shozi. Thank you, Eva. Round of applause. You guys are so quiet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I understand it's the end of the morning, so I'll try to be to the point. And first of all, let me acknowledge the leadership of DDG of the FFA, Sambi, of course, traditional leaders, communities, peoples and parks, NGOs, research institutions, and all stakeholders that are here today for this very important, consultative process on the Nbsaps. So just to introduce myself, I'm Eva Bortolotti from the United Nations Development Programs. I'm a program specialist on nature finance. I'm currently seconded from UNDP headquarters to the UNDP office in South Africa. So I'll be looking forward to engaging with all of you in these days. And especially, I would like to build my presentation today on what was mentioned early on in the morning by my colleague, Samki, regarding the biodiversity expenditure review. So you should have indeed received the documents for consultation. So I had the very difficult task to try to summarize in around 20 minutes, many hundreds pages of documents if you got a chance to look at them. I think there was a question before in the audience about whether we are allowed to provide comments. Of course, you are allowed to provide comments. Everything that we are presenting today is a draft open for your feedbacks. So we're open to receive your comments from all stakeholders that have some technical inputs to provide us today. So this is a bit what we want to deal with for today. So I'm going to just give you a bit of intro on what actually the biofilm program is, what we are trying to do, and how we are trying to address what we call the biodiversity finance gaps through the different steps of the biofilm methodology that lead to what we call the biodiversity finance plan. And I'll also provide some other resources that could be useful for you to have a look at. So just as background in terms what we are trying to achieve as BioFin. So BioFin is a program of UNDP, active in more than 130 countries. 90 of those countries are already in the process of developing a finance plan, while 40 are already in the stage of implementation. And BioFin as a methodology, and you might wonder why are we using this specific methodology? And it's not random. The methodology for the development of the biodiversity finance plan and the plan specifically are recognized in the resource mobilization strategy of the Convention of Biological Diversity. So it's there in the text that all countries in the world are recommended to develop such biodiversity finance plan. And you can see here a bit the status of those biodiversity finance plans worldwide. Those in orange are in development, and those in blue are already developed. And I wanted to use the slide to really highlight the fantastic work that I think has been done in South Africa, because South Africa has already been a champion. You can see it's in blue in the slide, because has actually developed a biodiversity finance plan already back in 2018. So what we're going to be presenting today is the second the updated biodiversity finance plan. So, and you also, are at your stage of your third Nbsap, we had very insightful presentations early in these days about, the status of the development of the Nbsaps. So it's very impressive to see, the stage where South Africa is at the third Nbsap and second biodiversity finance plan update. So why are we using this methodology? What are we trying to achieve? So we start from a baseline where we don't know how much money is spent on biodiversity, and we don't know how much money is needed to be spent. So through the application of the methodology of the biodiversity finance plan, we try to design a strategy to cost these factors and eventually close what we call the finance gap. So we end up in a situation from the baseline where we close that gap, and we have an estimation of how much is needed and what are the actions to be implemented. It's been a methodology refined throughout the years. We had many different iterations, and the latest methodology has been updated in 2024. So I will not spend time today to give you the very details, but we do have the workbook where you can, if you're interested, deep dive in terms of what it takes to implement the methodology. And you've seen this slide before from my colleague. So she did present before the biodiversity expenditure review. The biodiversity expenditure review is the second stage of the biofilm methodology, which is a whole comprehensive approach that starts from the policy and institutional review, then moves to the biodiversity expenditure review, the financial needs assessment. So the biodiversity expenditure review and the financial needs assessment are respectively trying to, first of all, understand how much we are spending on biodiversity, and then second, how much we need to spend. So the financial needs assessment is trying to cost the Nbsap. And then through all this data, we designed the biodiversity finance plan. And following the design, the endorsement of the biodiversity finance plan, that plan is implemented. So these are the 5 steps comprehensively. So what I'll try to do today is to give you some insights on what are the findings of the methodology so far in South Africa. We will not go into the details of the BR because, of course, those were presented earlier. So the first stage, as I mentioned, is the policy and institutional review. So the policy and institutional review really goes through different steps to identify what are the important trends and drivers of biodiversity loss, how they are addressed in the current policies, and what are the main institutions involved in those processes. And of course, I will not go through the details of all the amazing regulation that is already in place for South Africa that was already presented in detail by the FFE, I believe, by Bonnie earlier in the week. You are aware of the regulation that is there, but what the policy and legislative mapping is doing is really to go through to the regulation and see, where it is relevant for biodiversity finance. So are there maybe some practices already in place that are written into this regulation? Maybe they're not so explicit, but they're already addressing. Maybe we can build on them. Maybe we can expand on them. And also try to see how the regulation is aligned to the biodiversity targets of the Nbsaps, also when it comes to financing and financing needs. So basically, in this process, we do review different reports, and we consult with regulatory authorities, financial institutions, government agencies. I believe a questionnaire was also, distributed to get direct insights from the different stakeholders. So here you can see a bit of a fun example of the type of regulation that is being reviewed and how we identify different finance actions that are already recommended as part of these regulations. You can see, for example, in this slide, the income tax act that already provides reductions for landowners that declare their land as natural reserve, or the biodiversity economy strategy, which of course promote investments and job creation for biodiversity. And you see from this process, we have a list of different finance instruments that we see that already exist, like payment for ecosystem services, biodiversity offsets, and carbon credits that were mentioned in previous presentations today. So what is out there that is already in the regulations, is already working, and what are the policies that are supporting this kind of instruments? And of course, also the different revenue sources that come out of these processes. So we can see that these sources can be direct, coming from ecotourism. We had long discussions on the wildlife economy, and other direct sources. Bioprospecting is another good example, I believe. And also indirect sources like tax incentives that, as we mentioned before, is already present in the regulation. So from this process, we do recommend through the review of the laws, potential alignments. I think something that is always a good takeaway is the importance to align climate and biodiversity positives. We like to call this action as double win. How do we ensure that an action can create a double win for both climate outcomes and biodiversity outcomes? How do we work on nature-based solutions? How do we work on ecological corridors to boost species and also prevent the ecosystem and generate both carbon benefits and biodiversity benefits? And of course, interministerial alignment, we are speaking about biodiversity, but we are also speaking about finance. So aligning the two languages is not easy. And aligning the policies also can be challenging, so that alignment and cooperation, also in terms of data integration, having a platform that can integrate all the data, it's very important. Biodiversity expenditure review is the second step. We already went through this, so we'll not present it again. Just a reminder that as part of that process, we found, apologies, that when the expenditures are actually readjusted to inflation, the real expenditures have declined in the years between 2016 and 2024. So this is a reminder that the nominal real expenditures over time can actually change. Other steps of the biofin methodologies is the financial needs assessment. So I think this is an interesting one because yesterday we had very rich consultations, right? And as part of your consultations, you were on the Nbsap's thematic areas, you were asked, can this action be costed? So this is what we're trying to address in the financial needs assessment. Can the action be costed? Can we give a monetary value to the action, for example, in the Nbsap specific thematic area? It is a complex process, but the idea is to take Nbsap, so the 2016-2036 Nbsap in your case, 10 years timeline, and give it a cost for the different thematic area through costable units. I will not bore you with mathematics here. There's a methodology behind this. If you're interested, you can read it, but we do have some formula and some criteria that we can potentially use. The activity-based costing was used in the case of this study with a time horizon of 10 years, with sources taken from government program budgets, from Orsambi, the FFE, some parks, NGOs, development partners, and also kind of market benchmarks that we've seen through different stakeholders. It's not perfect. There's a sensitivity range. But it's an idea. It gives you an estimate of what does it cost to implement the Nbsap. What did we find? So you might remember the 12 thematic areas of the Nbsap. And basically, these are divided in 125 activities for the scope of this exercise. And we have been able so far to cost 17 activities under 5 thematic areas. So you can see here in dark blue the 5 thematic areas that we have been costing. And the total for this cost was over 600 million rands for the period of the 10 years. So this is a partial costing, but you can see already a bit of the trends. So for example, the topics, thematic area of mainstreaming biodiversity, restoration and invasive species, and ecosystem conservation, they were estimated to have an higher cost because of the different activities and the cost of the different activities through the years. This is, of course, partial, and these are other thematic areas that we are looking at in terms of how to be costed. We do welcome, contributions to this, to understand, how to cost other thematic areas of the Nbsaps. And yesterday, I was in the working group on the sustainable use, and I do remember stakeholder mentioning, yes, we can cost this. So do help us to cost these different areas. Of course, any input is welcome in this process. And finally, the big topic, the biodiversity finance plan. So the biodiversity finance plans basically takes everything that I presented so far and learns from it and then develops a strategy. And that strategy compiles a list of finance solutions. Finance solutions meaning financial instruments or financial policies is a quite broad term that we use. And these finance solutions are decided on the basis of feasibility, economic viability, institutional capacity, and technical readiness. And especially in the new BFP, we are really trying to look at how to mobilize new sources of capital, like private capital, how to try to innovate in terms of mechanism, and strengthening the integration of biodiversity maybe into existing mechanisms. Just to give you an idea, this is the previous BFP, the previous Biodiversity Finance Plan from 2018, a quick overview, of course, where you can see the different list of finance solutions that were selected under the previous BFP, and the previous BFP has been implemented in the past years. And it covered different financial solutions, as for example, I think it was mentioned actually in these days, the Biodiversity Investment Portal, which is this portal where we display a number of projects that do contribute to biodiversity. And this is a solution that was identified and supported through, of course, the Biodiversity Finance Plan. And this solution of course, other solutions mentioned the offset portal, improving the effectiveness of the offset system, and for that we did support the establishment of an offset portal, for example. So all these solutions have been advancing in this year, and we have been evaluating them in terms of effectiveness, and to do so we usually evaluate them in terms of institutionalization. And what does that mean? How much these solutions are owned by stakeholders, how much they can carry on in time without the support of additional financing, because they do create a financing loop that can sustain itself, and they are really housed into national institutions as the FFE, as SAMBI, and others. Of course, the financial outcome in terms of how much mobilized. For example, the investment portal already mobilized nearly $500,000. And lastly, of course, the biodiversity outcome. So this is just to give you a sense of what happened so far. And we did learn from this process. I think it's, and the first one was, of course, the importance of institutionalization, how, for example, the portal is now hosted by national institutions that can be taken forward. And then the importance to not rely too much on donor funding. We mentioned a lot in these days the importance of vertical funds like the GEF and the GCF. This funding is essential, but we are actually seeing that the funding from international donors is shrinking, right? Especially the real value through inflation. So we should design solutions that can use that donor funding to generate additional funding and become self-sustainable. It cannot be always waiting for the vertical fund contribution, because it's not going to go up in the years. It's just going to go down. In the previous finance plans also, we didn't have an actual financing vehicle. It was more a policy financial solutions oriented. So we did see that as a gap that we tried to address in the new plan. And of course, we do see the importance, and this was a learning from that plan, of increasing the role of municipal and provincial entities. So of course they do also play a role in finances. There was a very, very good discussion in the mainstreaming session the other day in terms of how that financing flows and what is the role of municipalities. So what did we come up with? And I only have a few minutes, so I'm sorry, I will need to rush a bit over this. So with the new biodiversity finance plan, we come up with 10 prioritized financial solutions. And these range from public solutions to improve the effectiveness of public budgets to solutions to mobilize the private sector finance. So the first one is the blended finance facility. So the plan identified the need to develop an instrument, so a vehicle. This was something that was missing in the previous plan. And I think it was very great to have DBSA presenting before me, because indeed the plan at the time of writing identified DFA DBSA as a potential partner of these solutions, and indeed DBSA is now setting up the biodiversity investment facility, which is indeed an instrument that is aligned with the recommendation of the plan. And I think the role of blended finance has also been highlighted by other speakers today at SAMBI. So the idea is to really use, innovative, different range of financial instruments, from guarantees to loans, to also direct technical support to projects, to de-risk private investments. The plan at the time, was analyzing this and expecting this to be between 15 and 10 million, and DBSA now is looking even at 300 million capitalization, if I remember well. So of course it is still on development, but it's the opportunity to crowd in private capital and to really mobilize finance in a way that was not done before. Other instruments that were identified, no specific order here, more on the fiscal side. I think there was mentioned before, the role of different stakeholders when owning land, and when those stakeholders, decide to convert that land into protected areas, the importance to provide fiscal benefits. So, to any type of stakeholders, landowner, communities, firms. So that also is an opportunity to really improve stewardship, restoration, and wildlife economies. With, of course, different partners that can play a role in this. Another thing that we did mention is biodiversity budget tagging. And this, I think, takes us back to the BER, the Biodiversity Expenditure Review. It's very difficult to improve the flow of finance if you don't know where the finance is going. And when you do biodiversity budget tagging, which you might be familiar with climate tagging, is a very similar process, but for biodiversity, you are able to better understand where the financing is going and to tag expenditure to biodiversity outcomes. And that, of course, improves transparencies and prioritization. On biodiversity offsets, and we'll not spend too much time on this because we did mention them before, of course, you already have your national biodiversity offset guideline. So the idea here is to see how to set up a banking system to trade those credits in a more also effective manners, and especially to focus on scaling efforts of this already existing solution, looking at the registry and priority geographies where we could scale. There are also opportunities, I believe, here in looking at the voluntary market, because when a country has a very good legislation on biodiversity offsets, there are opportunities also to design the legislation on voluntary biodiversity credits. Last solutions, before I wrap up, just give me a few more minutes. Of course, thematic bonds. There are different types of thematic bonds. You might have heard about, green bonds, sustainability, ocean bonds, but basically identifying the bond instruments where the use of its proceeds could go into biodiversity. Different types, ecological infrastructure, protected areas. Of course, we all are familiar with the rhino bond of the IFC that was mentioned before. But this is really a way to enter more of the capital market. It was mentioned today also they need to set up a fund, and that was indeed also identified in the Biodiversity Finance Plan as a priority with key partners as the FFE and SAMBI and some parks and the Treasury. And the idea is to have this as legally independent, and usually these instruments are able to absorb donor funding, philanthropic funding, and other revenue sources, right? And combine endowment and shrinking and revolving windows. And so the last financial solutions are looking a bit more at the biodiversity economy, which was discussed a lot today, both in terms of how to also engage the private sector. So there's a lot of need, and we have seen this in UNDP work, of mainstreaming biodiversity into green finance and sustainable finance regulation. So taxonomy, bond guidelines, and ESG disclosure. These regulations, very often, they don't include biodiversity and only climate. So how do we mainstream their regulation? There's the opportunity to use tariffs and fees to indeed, for the private sector, to support conservation finance. There's the opportunity also to do crowdfunding campaigns and philanthropy, so basically leverage the CSR contribution from big companies to create crowdfunding specifically for biodiversity outcomes. And last and not least, there is the Cali Fund. This is not a South Africa-specific instrument. We did mention it yesterday in the conversation related to access to benefit sharing. But basically, the Cali Fund is this multilateral mechanism to receive contribution from global corporations, mostly pharmaceuticals, to channel resources into biodiversity because they are using digital sequencing information. So, those very large pharmaceutical corporations that are making millions of profits are using those very digital sequences in, for example, South Africa, to have very high revenues. So those corporations should commit to give back to the communities. And the Cali Fund actually has a rule that 50% of what is going to be contributed to the fund should go back to the communities. And some corporates are already committed to the fund. So it's not yet fully operational. It's being established, but some corporates are already committed. So South Africa should be looking at how do we establish a national mechanism to allow this system to be implemented right in the country. So how do all these solutions work together? So first of all, they mobilize new sources of capital. So you've seen the focus on blended financing in terms of trying to mobilize better the private sector and to offer to the private sector an instrument to invest in. But they improve the efficiency of public finance, through tagging, fiscal benefits, and just the improvement of already existing regulation also on budgets and tax incentives. And lastly, they do create new revenue markets. So we have been seeing of these, and these markets can become self-sustainable and then really scale. So having new finance products as thematic bonds, as integrated biodiversity into carbon credits, improving, the banking, habitat banking system through the offset system. I mean, all of these can really create new revenues for biodiversity. So this is about shifting from a fragmented and, system to a scalable system that really involves all stakeholders. I just want to close with 1 more minute, please, because I want to give you some resources, and in particular a couple of them. So you have seen our main takeaways from the Biodiversity Finance Fund for South Africa. BioFin also provides a lot of global resources that are accessible and useful for all countries. One is the e-learning module that we have. And so if you want to learn more about biodiversity finance, you want to learn more about the methodologies, you just want to understand a bit better what's beyond those numbers, this is a free access course. We already have more than 70,000 participants. You can take it anytime, and it's very interactive and straightforward. And then lastly, the Finance Resource Database for Biodiversity, also called FIRE. And that, I want to really highlight it. This is very interesting for all the NGOs, academia, and projects and communities in the room, because this is a database where you can go and see different funding that is available for biodiversity, so different type of funds. So grants, loans, guarantees, you just select your funding type, you select your target sector, and then the type of funding that you're looking for. You can look at different opportunities. So if you're looking for funding globally, this is a very good, from a global source, but a funding that can go at the local level, this is a very good platform to you to look at. Let's say you're looking at a blue and ocean finance, you can looking at grants, and here is an example of a Blue Action Fund that provides grants for ocean projects. So I'll just wrap up here today. Thank you so much for your attention, and these are some of the discussion questions that we have for you if you want to contribute to the rest of the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva, for that presentation. Colleagues, we have only 25 minutes between us and lunch, and there is a last section that Jen was so kind to assist with to facilitate, and it will touch a bit on the results from the Mentimeter that we did in this morning, but also some few questions and allow a plenary few inputs from that. Thanks very much, Jen, for that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Zungu. I am the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan facilitator that falls under the Nbsap Accelerator Partnership. The Nbsap Accelerator Partnership is really a country-led and country-driven initiative that's looking at how we try to fast-track the implementation of our Nbsaps. It's hosted between the Convention of Biological Diversity, the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Environment Program. And the work of the partnership really is to support countries in planning implementation and accelerating of the Nbsaps. And this is through in-country engagement. And the kind of services that sit under this program and partnership is really the facilitator partnership or program where I fit in, as well as the matchmaking mechanism And then lastly, also looking at communications, advocacy, and knowledge exchange and capacity building. So I just wanted to contextualize that a little bit, because I know it's been mentioned a couple of times during the course of the last few days. Now, we've heard quite a bit from our colleagues this morning around financing, and there's a lot of issues and questions that have come up. And we were mindful of the time that was left, so we do want to create the opportunity to hear from people, some perspectives on this, but we also we know that there's not sufficient time for everybody to be heard, and so we've also created the questions on Mentimeter. And Pradil, our Mentimeter fairy, has kindly indicated that she will just run those questions for us. So starting this session, we've just heard from Eva, and we've also heard from Moho a little bit earlier in terms of the development of the biodiversity finance plan and all of the different elements that go into it. And then we've also heard like what the big development finance institutions are busy with in thinking about how they incorporate biodiversity and how they think about financing biodiversity. So having listened to what Eva's presented just now, in terms of these 10 finance solutions, we do want to engage and find out from partners, stakeholders on the floor, what would enable that? So when you look at those 10 finance mechanisms, or finance solutions rather, what would enable the implementation? What are some of the key things that you, having looked at that and read through some of the information that's come through, what would enable that for us to be able to implement those financial solutions that have been highlighted? So I think, Pradil, if we can get the first, we're going to request people just scan the QR code, and so that we can start answering those first questions, so people can use their phones. And then I also just want to get the roving mic, so that we start to get responses from the floor as well. And particularly when we think about enabling implementation, in some of the previous consultations that we've had, quite a few people have raised that they see these resources, but how does it get to me if I'm sitting in a community? Other colleagues have also raised there's so many legal hoops that they need to jump through. And so that's part of what we also want to unpack, because we need to make sure that this is fit for purpose for South Africa. We want to have finance solutions that really work for us in the country. So I want to open the floor to that initial question around what would really enable these finance solutions to become operational in South Africa. So any reflections from the floor? I understand now what colleagues were saying about the lighting up here. So I can't see that well if there's any hands that have gone up. I'm not seeing any hands go up at the moment. Okay, so I'll have a look a little bit at what's coming through the Mentimeter. There's a comment around the FFE should be supporting NGOs and other organizations that have already piloted many of these initiatives instead of duplicating. So really useful. Let's not do things over and over when there's already really good benchmarks. Projects that actually achieve impact and do M&E to demonstrate this, like the TNC Waterfront project, no greenwashing like tree planting, spec boom in the wrong places. Very good lesson in terms of not doing greenwashing. We don't want that. Very important, finance solutions should give priority to communities where the projects are being implemented to access funding. We had really amazing feedback yesterday coming from the thematic areas, reflecting on what one of the community members had presented on the work that they've been doing for the last, in excess of a decade, and are just looking at how they could expand that. So really building on that is quite key. Capacity building, and I see there's a note around capacity building on officials on the ground, remove unnecessary red tape. More awareness, let stakeholders on the ground know of them, really important. We need to ensure that funds are not wasted on unnecessary overheads, but that the maximum amount reaches on the ground with benefits for nature, and I suspect that's for nature and people. So really good reflections coming from the floor. Are there any inputs that people want to make? I see a hand in the middle row. Any other hands? Okay, let's go to the lady in the middle.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I believe we've been promoted to colleagues now, not just ladies and gentlemen, and protocols that are being observed. My contribution to this is that we need to ensure that we are explicit with the information that filters down to province as well as municipality. All the presenters that spoke to that, to province and municipality, but they are not giving us the practicalities. How do we do that? So if they can close the gap and give us the right direction, because where we are sitting right now, we are sitting in the national level, in fact, in an international level, because of UN is also here. So to bring it to our level, to where we live, to our provinces and to our municipalities, that will be very helpful, because the communities we are talking about, and majority of the comments talking about communities, you find them in municipalities, you find them in provinces. So where do we go? Is there a department like this one in the provincial level? What is it called? Because we understand provincial level can also be calling these departments with different names. So if we can be helped with that.
Thank you so much. I see a second hand this side, and then I see another hand to the back, just 2 rows behind the other lady. So let me take this one quickly.
Thank you. And just to really thank all the presenters for very excellent presentations. It's been a really very rich morning. Really, in a slightly broader point, to some extent responding to your question, is to remember the point that was made yesterday by Advocate Radia Razak around the fact that really South Africa is responsible for managing an ocean space that is larger than our land space. So we need to be designing finance solutions that take into consideration the very the specificity and the very specific challenges around ocean conservation, communities dependent, community livelihoods dependent on the ocean. Our marine protected areas are part of that 30 by 30 expansion. And there are challenges such as the revenue streams from marine protected areas are different in comparison with terrestrial protected areas, and the challenge of monitoring marine protected areas is very different to the terrestrial space. And I think Sandparks is in fact talking about mega living landscapes and seascapes. It's not only terrestrial, so it's also ocean and coastal. So slightly more general point. Thank you.
I'll take the question there at the back.
Greetings. It's not a question, just a comment. It would be critical to approach whatever funding mechanisms are there with an approach of pipeline, strong project pipeline development, post-funding support to reduce complexity and also improve the fund performance, but also design it in such a way to improve inclusiveness and access. I can just cite 2 examples, the Aquaculture Development Fund, the Agro Energy Fund that have had some exposure to it, where the funds are available, but the quality of the project, the complexity that is involved, and it's just speak to somebody who's sitting at RMB or Standard Bank, corporate investment banking. It's not talking to the reality on the ground. Perhaps one could have one aspect or one instrument that is targeting like very small businesses, and then they can graduate to more complex funds, DBSA and all of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Really useful inputs, and I really like the last one because that's come up before also, around thinking about how do we get money to the ground. which is also what the first speaker touched on quite importantly. And I want us to give an opportunity for the second and third questions as well. But I want to touch on the point that the second speaker made around the oceans economy, and that's a really important point as well, because we've had really good inputs as well from communities that are very dependent on the ocean and the marine space, that have also highlighted that around, like, we need to be more visible in these processes also. So really grateful for that. I want to request that we maybe move to the second question so that we are allowed, we have the option to go through all of them. So having noted some of the comments that have been made and reflecting on what's come through the biodiversity finance solutions, what are some of the other options we need to think about from a resource mobilization perspective? So is there anything that's listed here that might be missing? What are we not seeing that you want to comment, like pay attention to that, make sure, particularly in the context of resource mobilization? I think one of the key things that still sit for me is around building capacity. We often show the resources and we say there's this, but we need to think in the same vein, is that as much as we can provide access to it, we also need to build the capacity with those that need to engage with it. So those are one of the key things for me. Is there anything else that's coming up burning from the floor that we need to consider as we think about resource mobilization for the Nbsap?
Okay, I see you can't see me.
Apologies.
Because I'm in your blind spot. And I needed to comment on that first part of the question, if you allow that.
Yes.
Because I think it's critical, and I need to sit now, because I actually have written down what I wanted to say. The enablers for me will be one, that we need a single national coordinating mechanism for all of these 10 finance solutions that you have proposed, that consist of your DFFE, your treasury, even your people and parks should be involved there. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you, great stuff. So that's for me critical, that coherent or National Biodiversity Finance Council, that also include your community representation in there. Then in terms of policy and regulatory reform that is needed to enable these solutions, I think the legal recognition of community stewardship as a costed public good is critical for me in terms of that regulatory reform and policy reform that needs to happen. Then thirdly, on institutional capacity and governance, we need, if these funds are starting to flow, it's critical that your communities are actually capacitated, fiduciary capacitated to receive and also manage that funds. And then maybe a last enabler from my side before I bore people with all these comments that I'm making is also bankable pipelines of projects. And that's actually where clear revenue models should exist for restoration, tourism, your offsets, your carbon, and also cultural landscapes. So that's for me critical. I mean, the last one should have been on community and indigenous participation. That will be 6.
Okay. Thank you so much. And that was really useful. Thank you for adding that. I think those are really important points that you've raised. And it links to the capacity building one is a really important one, the policy discussion and reform, and having a coherent structure. I think that's a critical one. So thank you so much for bringing that to our attention as well. I see there's a couple of key things coming up on the Mentimeter around the other options for resource mobilization. We're going futuristic. We're talking about digital natural currency coin that is specific to those in this sphere. I'm pretty sure that's one of our younger people that put that on. Shifting harmful subsidies is on there. Inclusivity is becoming a key theme that's come through all the different sections that we've discussed. Need for aligning public funding mechanisms with other mechanisms and funding interventions at a local level, reiterating what the first speaker raised earlier on. Resource mobilization requires building trust, which takes time, and everyone seems to be chasing the quick wins. That is such an important point that was raised there, so really grateful for the person that put that on. And then just another one, looking at engaging with funders to review their models and criteria for funding to accommodate the same communities that they're encouraging to apply. So again, really strengthening that enabling environment for resource mobilization to happen. I'll take one more. Private sector doesn't trust government, so independence from government and oversight is important. Okay, so trust is also coming through as quite an interesting theme in the discussions. Any other key reflections around options for resource mobilization? Are people quite comfortable with that? Okay, I'm not immediately seeing hands, but then I'm also squinting. Okay, so let's look at the third question, which I really wanted us also to think about. So having listed all of those, having a bit of a discussion around the kind of enabling environment for those different solutions, thinking about other options for resource mobilization, which of these mechanisms and solutions should we really focus our effort and attention around prioritizing? So what is most critical when having looked at those? Because often when you have a laundry list, there's a challenge in that you want to do everything, but you don't get to anything. So if you wanted to guide us in terms of what are some of the top 3, the top 4 things that we really need to prioritize in order for us to really start to make headway around resourcing the work in the Nbsap. So anything coming up? I'm seeing skills development popping up on the Mentimeter. Any hands? I'm not seeing any hands. This is the opportunity, people. Tell us what are the top priorities for you. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. I think it's lunch that's doing this. Just a few more minutes, I promise. Anything else that you think is really important in terms in relation to the solutions that have been put up that we really need to prioritize or think about? Okay, I think we've exhausted it because there's no further input coming through. Okay. But you still have the opportunity to add as much as you want on the Mentimeter. We'll keep it going for the next 2 or 3 minutes. I'm seeing a few people adding, looking at investing in the use of technology. The world is evolving. Technology transfer and exchange to promote innovation, simplification of instruments, strategic partnerships across different sectors, enhancing human capacity in terms of institutionalization, strengthening public and private partnerships, local biodiversity preservation, human value, upskilling, equipment that can help to focus one direction, use of personal resources distracts you from giving the best you can offer. Okay. Localized solutions for the benefit of indigenous participants and capacity building. So there's coming a couple of key things, centralized, looking at technology, looking at how we strengthen capacity, really localizing that, bringing it down to ground, simplifying the instruments that we use to be able to do this. So those are some of the key things that's come up.
Ms. Chair, can I actually at this point in time, maybe from a people and parks perspective, just give the one priority? I think Mr. Mutibi actually alluded to that thing of biodiversity budget tagging. That's for us the most important thing that should happen, because I think that is a critical priority.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So there's a very explicit priority that we need to pay attention to. I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, there's one here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I think for me it's upscaling the biodiversity sector investment portal. It is already there. What we need to do is for it to start attracting resources. So we have this instrument is there. We have projects on the website, but what's lacking is the attraction of resources. So if we can work on that.
That's really great. Thanks for that, Mpo. And I think that's quite important because we do want to be able to connect investors with our community members, but there's something in there that's stuck, and we need to figure out how to support that. All right, so my time is up, but I really want to thank everybody for this quick round of us just quickly looking at what are some of the options, what can we prioritize, where should we focus our attention on, how do we strengthen the enabling environment for us to be able to do this. Please feel free to add any other comments and share through the course of the afternoon as well, but thank you so much for your inputs and support on this. Thanks, everyone.
Apologies, the facilitator was gallivanting. I apologize. I think we are on time, and well done to our presenters. And the audience doesn't really sound right for me. We've been working together, and we're still going to continue working together. So also a round of applause for you, colleagues. Lunch will be served at Serengeti, the same venue as yesterday. So we'll meet there for lunch. And colleagues, it's lunch and it has been a very long day. There is someone who left the card. It's an ABSA card. Very tempting after this, long engagement. So it's safe with me, but I'm not promising anything. So please come and collect your card. Don't tempt us. So we have two. It doesn't have a name. So we only have 2 items left after lunch. It will be just touching on the implementation roadmap. Tate Matibe will do that, and there will be a closing remark. So let's try and be back at 2 so that we can just finish. I think it won't even take us more than 40 minutes. So let's meet at 2. Thank you very much for your participation this morning. Thank you. Okay, and I'm not sure if it's reading classes, but there is another item here, lost and found, I don't know. As we go to lunch, colleagues, those who still have time, please make sure that you also visit the stalls. There are SMMEs waiting for you there. Thank you.